Chapter 277. When Lung Shichi saw Delta Origi again after more than half a year, there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. It would be a lie to say that he didn't miss Delta Origi these days, but he missed the feeling of mutual trust between him and Delta Origi. Now that they met, he suddenly couldn't speak. No, both of them were wearing masks, so it couldn't be considered a real meeting. Delta Origi was stunned when he saw Lung Shichi come out. He was shocked by Lung Shichi's size. Originally, Lung Shichi was only a little taller than Delta Origi, but now he was more than a head taller. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Delta Origi's familiar voice came. Lung Shichi smiled gently and made a please gesture. Lung Shichi brought Delta Origi to his small courtyard, which was still taken care of while he was away. The entire small courtyard was decorated very delicately. Although the place was not big, it was very comfortable. "Greetings, master." Two servant disciples, Zhe and Jin, who took care of the small courtyard, came up to greet him. "Well, go ahead." Lung Shichi greeted them and walked into the room with Delta Origi. As soon as he entered the room, Delta Origi immediately asked, "When did you break through?" Lung Shichi smiled in his heart. Delta Origi was still so strong. "About 2 months ago." Since he broke through, it took him a month to rush back to the Donglin County branch from the demon-suppressing town. Then, it took him nearly a month to wait for the illusory spirit's secret realm to open. It took him another 10 days to come from Donglin County to the General Pavilion. Counting the days, it was almost 3 months. Delta Origi murmured, "You're still earlier than me." Lung Shichi knew that the Delta Origi would say this, but before he could say anything, the Delta Origi spoke again. "I heard that you went to the Donglin County branch." "Not bad. You must have seen a lot of interesting things." Delta Origi's tone contained a hint of yearning. Lung Shichi suddenly remembered that Delta Origi had been cultivating in the Blood Cloak Pavilion ever since they came out of the Blood Fog Island. She would definitely know how big this world was and how exciting it was through reading the books. However, she was like a canary in a cage. Although she had plenty of resources and guidance from Sky Origin Stage cultivators, she had no freedom at all. Including the time he spent on the Blood Fog Island, Gu-san should have not left for almost 3 years. Lung Shichi's heart skipped a beat. Thinking about it, it was actually a good thing that he was transferred to the Donglin County branch. So he said, "I did learn a lot, but the outside world is also full of dangers. If you're not careful, you'll be smashed to pieces. Aren't you doing well? You even broke through to the spiritual pulse stage earlier than me." Delta Origi's words sounded strange. Lung Shichi touched his nose. "Why did they go back to the topic?" Delta Origi said, "So I'm curious. What have you experienced?" Lung Shichi organized his words and replied, "Actually, it's nothing. After I arrived at the Donglin County branch, I took a task." Next, Lung Shichi roughly told her what he had experienced. He hid a few great dangers and only said that he survived because of luck. He did not tell the complete truth about Nine Leaf. He only said that she was a strange demon beast who had gained intelligence in advance. After all, Nine Leaf's existence was too shocking. Without Nine Leaf's permission, he did not dare to reveal Nine Leaf's true identity. Even so, Delta Origi's emotions fluctuated. She was silent for a while before sighing slightly. "You've experienced life and death several times outside. It's natural for you to have such cultivation." Delta Origi was a very shrewd person. Even though Lung Shichi deliberately hid some things, she could vaguely guess. Lung Shichi changed the topic and asked, "Then why don't you go out and do a few tasks?" "It's because of my master, Bone Demon." Delta Origi actually had a hint of complaint when she mentioned Bone Demon. "He made me unable to finish my apprenticeship before I reached the spiritual pulse stage. I finally broke through to the spiritual pulse stage a month ago, but he insisted that I practice several cultivation methods and spiritual techniques. It was not until these 2 days that I finally finished my apprenticeship. Although my cultivation is at the spiritual pulse stage, my blood droplets are empty. I can't be promoted to the blood-clothed assassin. I originally planned to take missions to accumulate blood droplets and go out for a walk. I just happened to hear Master mention that you're back, so I came to take a look." Hearing this, Leng Shiqi secretly thought that Delta Origi was facing the same awkward situation as him. He said, "Your current identity is still a black-clothed assassin. You can only take 1 or 2-star missions. These missions can at most give you between 50 to 60 blood droplets. If that's the case, you'll have to do at least 10 to 20 missions to be promoted to the blood-clothed assassin." Delta Origi nodded and said, "I know. That's why I came to find you." Leng Shiqi paused for a moment. Then he thought of a possibility. "Sure enough," Delta Origi said, "you're now a blood-clothed assassin. You can take 3 or 4-star missions. You can take missions and we'll finish them together. Then you can split the blood droplets with me. This way, it'll be much faster." Leng Shiqi had to admit that this was indeed a good idea. In other words, it was a bit like taking a smurf to do missions. The only difference was that this smurf was also very strong. However, Leng Shiqi did not immediately agree. Instead, he looked hesitant. Gu San naturally knew what Leng Shiqi was thinking. She lightly snorted and said, "You're a guy who doesn't wake up early if there are no benefits. I've cultivated a lot of spirit skills at Master's place. Among them, I can't teach you anything related to Master, but I can teach you the rest." Deal. Leng Shiqi agreed very quickly. Delta Origi. Not long after, Leng Shiqi came to the blood-clothed palace again. However, Delta Origi did not come in. This was because only blood-clothed assassins could enter this place. Even Delta Origi, the direct disciple of Bone Demon, could not enter. Leng Shiqi came here to take missions. He had discussed with Delta Origi that it would be best to take missions that were closer to him and had more blood droplets. He carefully looked around a few black-veined stone slabs in the corner of the Bloodkill Palace. These slabs were filled with 3 and 4-star missions. The 3-star missions were mainly targeted at Spirit Pulse early or mid-Spirit Pulse realm cultivators, while the 4-star missions were targeted at Spirit Pulse late-stage cultivators or Spirit Pulse realm cultivators with special identities. Leng Shiqi did not become arrogant. He planned to take a 3-star mission to try his hand at it. He walked around twice and chose 3 or 4 suitable missions. They were all within the Muchen region and had around 200 blood droplets. Just as he was about to take a mission, another mission suddenly appeared on the black-veined stone slab. Leng Shiqi's attention was drawn over. It was a 4-star mission, but the target of the mission was a spirit cultivator at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. Furthermore, it was someone who had some relationship with Leng Shiqi. Mission target: abandoned disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect, OZU. Chapter 278. Many people saw the mission information, but everyone who saw it was in disbelief. OZU's name was known even in Yukon County. He was the most outstanding disciple of the younger generation of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect, one of the 8 desolate weapon arts. Who would dare to issue a mission to assassinate him? This was equivalent to breaking the foundation of the next generation of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect. However, what was even more unbelievable was that the mission information actually said, "Traitor of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect." In other words, OZU had betrayed the sect. This was even more inconceivable. For OZU, he was like the moon surrounded by stars in the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect. The sect would definitely pour a lot of resources and effort into him to nurture him. Moreover, they had heard that he had obtained the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation technique. His cultivation future was simply bright. It was even possible for him to control the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect in the future. Such a person would betray the sect? Was he crazy? Just as everyone was in a daze, Leng Shiqi quickly accepted the mission. He had met OZU a few times before and knew that OZU was also at the first level of the Spirit Pulse realm. Even if he was a disciple of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect, Leng Shiqi was confident that he could kill him. Moreover, the reward for this mission was extremely generous. Not only were there hundreds of spirit stones and 300 drops of blood, there was also a meridian opening pill. Of course, these were not the most important things. The most important thing was the inheritance of OZU's cultivation technique. He had another part of the divine illusion spirit technique on him. If Oziu was still a disciple of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect, Leng Shiqi would have almost no chance of obtaining another cultivation technique. But now, Oziu had actually become a traitor of the Thousand Illusionary Sword sect. Although he did not know the reason, he could openly make a move. This mission could not only help the Delta Origi obtain a large number of blood drops, but it was also possible to obtain another powerful cultivation technique. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Seeing that Leng Shiqi had accepted the mission, some of the surrounding people regretted it. This mission was not difficult, but it was already a 4-star mission. Moreover, if they could kill a peerless genius with their own hands, it would be a great honor. Unfortunately, Leng Shiqi was one step ahead. Since the mission had been accepted, the others could only shake their heads and disperse. In the blood clothing pavilion, disputes over missions were not allowed. This was the basic rule. Leng Shiqi walked out of the Bloodcloth Palace with the mission and the basic information related to the mission. At this time, Delta Origi was still waiting outside. Seeing Leng Shiqi come out, she was a little unhappy. "Why are you so slow?" "I received a special mission." Leng Shiqi pretended to be mysterious. Delta Origi asked, "Special? How many stars is this mission?" 4-star. Delta Origi was surprised. "A 4-star mission? We are going to assassinate a spirit cultivator at the late stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. Are you that confident? Let's talk as we walk." Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi walked to the exit of the blood clothing pavilion. At the same time, he gave the information of the mission to Delta Origi. Although this mission is listed as a 4-star mission, the target's cultivation is only at the first level of the Spirit Pulse realm, the same as you and me. He is Oziu of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. Delta Origi asked, "Oziu? The one you mentioned before, the one who obtained the Divine Illusion Palace's inheritance technique, Oziu?" "That's right." Delta Origi nodded and then looked at the information Leng Shiqi gave her. This information roughly described the reason why Oziu betrayed the sect and his current location. In Leng Shiqi's opinion, the reason why Oziu betrayed the sect was a little melodramatic. Oziu actually fell in love with a demonic Dao witch. A peerless genius from a top faction fell in love with a demonic Dao witch. This kind of thing might be written by many storytellers, but it really happened. According to the information, Oziu actually fell in love with a disciple of the Purgatory Demon sect from the 6 Paths of Demon Realm, who was ranked on the world's sect list. Although devil cultivators were not welcomed on this continent, it was not to the point where everyone wanted to beat them up. The 6 Paths of Demon Realm's Devil Dao sect was also a place that many spirit cultivators yearned for. However, the Purgatory Demon sect and the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had never been on good terms. Although they could not be said to be mortal enemies, they definitely did not have good words to say when they met. However, the leader of the younger generation of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect, Oziu, actually fell in love with a disciple of the Purgatory Demon sect, and she was only an ordinary outer disciple. Originally, this matter was handled internally by the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. It was nothing more than wanting Oziu to completely break off his relationship with that woman. Leng Shiqi even imagined a lot of plots. But somehow, it had developed to this point. Now that the news had spread like wildfire, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had lost all face. Leng Shiqi guessed that the mission to assassinate Oziu was most likely issued by the Thousand Illusion Sword sect themselves. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect maintained their status. On the surface, they only expelled Oziu from the sect and did not send anyone to kill him. However, it was not necessarily the case in the dark. No one knew about the hidden matters between the Thousand Illusion Sword sect and Oziu, or between Oziu and the Devil Dao witch. Leng Shiqi only knew that Oziu had become his assassination target and had escaped all the way to Muchen County. According to the information, Oziu had appeared near the Southern God Peak in Muchen County 3 days ago. Delta Origi quickly finished reading the information. She asked with some doubt, "Southern God Peak?" Leng Shiqi said, "What's wrong? What's so special about this Southern God Peak?" It's nothing. I usually like to read some miscellaneous books, so I have some impression of this southern god peak. It is said that every once in a while, a strange phenomenon will appear on the southern god peak. It is like a miracle, which is how it got its name. It is just that for so many years, no heavenly treasures have appeared there, so people are used to it. However, most people who come to Muchun County for the first time will go to see it. Lung Shichi nodded gently and secretly glanced at Delta Origi. She had never left the blood clothing pavilion, but she knew so much about the outside world. It could be seen how much she yearned for the outside world. He said, Ozu appeared there 3 days ago, and the southern god peak is not close. Even if we travel day and night, it will take 3 or 4 days to reach it. As a result, we have been delayed for 7 or 8 days. I don't even know where Ozu went. Delta Origi also felt that it was a bit tricky. Then what should we do? Let's go to Nantua City near the southern god peak first. There will be an intelligent stronghold of the sect there. Let's go there and get the latest information first. Okay, you have experience. I'll listen to you. Hearing this, Lung Shichi couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Since he became an assassin, he had completed 1.5 missions at most. He really didn't have much experience. Chapter 279. 3 days later, an old man with a rather strong body brought a young girl with an ordinary face and slightly dark skin to Nanta City. The old man was holding a map and looking at it seriously, as if he was looking for something. The young girl's bright eyes looked around, full of curiosity. These two people were Lung Shichi and Delta Origi in disguise. Because Delta Origi was still young, in order not to attract attention, she used the breath-concealing technique to hide her cultivation to the peak of the pure spirit realm. Lung Shichi put away the map and looked at Delta Origi beside him, revealing a kind smile and said, "Little Goo, come this way with Grandpa." Delta Origi heard this and immediately glared at Lung Shichi, then held Lung Shichi's waist and said, "Grandpa, you're old, I'll help you walk." However, her nails had already sunk deep into Lung Shichi's back. Even though Lung Shichi's body was not weak, he still grimaced in pain. Delta Origi sneered and let go of her hand. "What are you doing?" Lung Shichi bit his gums and said, "We have to hide our identities." Delta Origi said innocently, "We have to hide our identities. Won't it be more realistic if I help you?" Lung Shichi nodded helplessly, then brought Delta Origi to a dilapidated restaurant in a remote part of the city. This was the Blood Garment Pavilion's intelligence base in Nanta City. After a secret signal, a person dressed as a manservant welcomed them in. After passing through 2 secret doors, the manservant bowed and said, "This humble one, Dai Bin, greets the 2 esteemed envoys." Lung Shichi said straightforwardly, "I want the latest information on Ozu." So the 2 esteemed envoys are here for Ozu. This humble one has already sorted out the information. This is the latest information that was sorted out this morning. Please take a look. Dai Bin picked up the 2 pieces of information on the table. This is the information on Ozu's cultivation method and spirit technique, and the other is the information on his whereabouts. Very good. Lung Shichi took the report. How much? Dai Bin chuckled. Envoy, you really understand me. These 2 pieces of information only cost 2 spirit stones. Lung Shichi felt that it was a little expensive, but thinking that Ozu's identity was extraordinary, it was not easy to have such detailed information about him. Thus, he took out 2 spirit stones without hesitation. Dai Bin took the spirit stones happily and said, "Emissary, I have some information to give you." "I'm all ears." Actually, the 2 emissaries are not the only ones who want Ozu's life. Lung Shichi was a little puzzled. In Mukan County, there are still people who dare to steal our Blood Garment Pavilion's business? Although the Blood Garment Pavilion was the most powerful assassin force in the entire Thunderfire dynasty, the dynasty was vast and had abundant resources. Even the Blood Garment Pavilion could not take over such a large place. Therefore, there were also some small and medium-sized assassin forces in the Thunderfire dynasty, but they could only drink the leftover soup of the Blood Garment Pavilion. If Ozu appeared in other prefectures, it was possible that another assassin force was involved. However, this was Mukon County. It was where the Blood Garment Pavilion's main pavilion was located. Which blind assassin force would dare to interfere? Daibin replied, "That's not the case. It's mainly because some rogue cultivators covet Ozu's cultivation method, spirit technique, and cultivation resources. In addition, there are also a few small forces that are secretly inquiring about Ozu." Lung Shichi nodded in understanding. Now, the news of Ozu's betrayal had spread. Without the powerful back mountain of the 1,000 illusionary sword sect, his cultivation was only at the first level of the spirit vein realm, but he had many high-level cultivation methods and spirit techniques. Naturally, he would attract many wolves. This information is very useful. Goodbye. Lung Shichi felt that the 2 spirit stones were worth it. If he deliberately lowered the price, he would definitely be able to do so. However, he would not be able to get the information after that. Daibin smiled and said, "Welcome again, esteemed envoy." After leaving the small restaurant, Delta Origi said, "It seems that we need to move faster." "You're right. Although those rogue cultivators and small forces do not have detailed information, they might be able to find Ozu with their numbers. By the way, why are only rogue cultivators and small forces secretly chasing after Ozu? Why don't those large forces make a move?" Delta Origi had such a question in her heart. Lung Shichi explained, "Of course they want to make a move. However, it's easy to determine the cultivation methods and spirit techniques of those large sect's disciples. Although Ozu has been expelled from the sect by the 1,000 illusionary sword sect, if a certain force openly assassinated Ozu, it would still be equivalent to slapping the 1,000 illusionary sword sect's face. Of course, another important reason is that this is Mukon County. The large forces of the other provinces and counties do not dare to ignore the Blood Robe Pavilion and easily set foot here. And those small forces that came to kill Ozu are probably the local forces of Mukon County. Delta Origi had never left the Blood Robe Pavilion, so she was not very clear about some of the unspoken rules between the various forces. He muttered, "So that's how it is." Then, the 2 of them walked into an alley and began to check on Ozu's information. Lung Shichi was very surprised. Ozu was still in the Southern Divine Peak. In other words, Ozu had been in the Southern Divine Peak for 7 or 8 days. What was a fugitive like him doing here instead of running away? Doesn't he know that someone will come to kill him? Lung Shichi quickly rejected this idea. In the illusory spirit secret realm, he had been in close contact with Ozu. Although they did not say anything, he could see that Ozu was also a shrewd person. He had the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace and no longer had the backing of the 1,000 Illusion Sword sect. There were many people who wanted to kill him. Delta Origi said at this time, there must be a deeper meaning for him to come to the Southern Divine Peak. Maybe there is something in the Southern Divine Peak that attracted him, so much so that he took the great risk to stay here. It's very possible. Lung Shichi continued, there is no time to lose. Let's go to the Southern Divine Peak now. Let's go. The Southern Divine Peak was quite famous in the entire Mukon County. At the peak, every 2 or 3 months, there would be thousands of dreamy streaks of light flashing. It could be said to be a miracle. Anyone who passed through Mukon County would come here to take a look at this place, to see this wonderful scene. The Southern Divine Peak was 100 li away from Nantua City. By the time Lung Shichi and Delta Origi arrived, it was already late at night. But even so, the small town at the foot of the mountain was still brightly lit. Lung Shichi asked around and found out that according to the frequency of the phenomena in the Southern Divine Peak, these 2 days would be the time when the phenomena would appear again, so many people had gathered here to go up the mountain to take a look. This time, Lung Shichi had a bit of a headache. Now that there were many people gathered at the Southern Divine Peak, there must be people who came to assassinate Ozu mixed in. Delta Origi also realized that they were in trouble. They looked at each other and decided to go up the mountain overnight. Chapter 280. The Southern Divine Peak towered into the clouds, and the mountain path was extremely rugged. However, under the night sky, there were still figures entering the mountain. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi were two of them. The night was no longer an obstacle for spirit cultivators in the spirit pulse realm. The two of them quickly passed through the forest like cheetahs, constantly approaching the peak. Shwa! Lung Shichi suddenly stopped in his tracks. Delta Origi also stopped, but she did not ask. She knew that Lung Shichi must have his reasons for doing so. Lung Shichi said in a low voice, "There's movement." Immediately, the veins at the corner of his eyes bulged, and his eyes turned green and white. He activated Byakugan. Delta Origi looked at this pair of eyes. She had seen Lung Shichi activate Byakugan on the last floor of the blood-colored tower, but at that time, her attention was on fusing with the blood beast, so she did not observe carefully. In Lung Shichi's vision, he quickly discovered that there were people fighting 3 miles away. Their cultivation was at the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. 2 of them were working together to kill the other person. Lung Shichi immediately said, "Let's go take a look. Maybe we can get some different information." With that, he directly pulled Delta Origi's wrist and sank into the ground. Delta Origi knew that Lung Shichi had such a strange method, but it was her first time experiencing it, so she could not help but be a little surprised. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the vicinity of the battlefield. In the battle, the 2 people who worked together wore the same clothes and both used blades. The blade chi contained traces of the soft power of water, so they must be from some sect. The person who was surrounded had inferior and complicated spiritual techniques, and looked like a rogue cultivator. At this time, there were already several wounds on his body, and he was bitterly holding on. In the same realm, rogue cultivators were originally weaker than spirit cultivators. Now that he was surrounded by 2 people, if this person did not have the means to escape, he would die here sooner or later. Lung Shichi whispered, "Those 2 people should be from the third-rate force, Horizontal Water Fortress. Are they also here for Oziu?" Delta Origi asked. "It's possible. Let's wait and see." On the other side, under the pressure of the 2 traversing water stronghold people, the rogue cultivator had already revealed a somewhat desperate expression. One of them immediately said arrogantly, "Humph, a little rogue cultivator dares to follow us? You're courting death. Senior brother Zhan Fong, why waste your breath on him? Let's kill him and continue looking for Oziu." Zhan Fong said meaningfully, "That's true, but junior brother Healy, this person's things." Healy immediately smiled and said, "Of course senior brother Zhan Fong will choose first." That rogue cultivator was clearly not dead yet, but they were discussing how to distribute his resources, which made the rogue cultivator both shocked and angry. The rogue cultivator shouted, "You've gone too far." Zhan Fong and Healy looked at each other and laughed out loud. They did not put the rogue cultivator in their eyes at all. Following that, 2 sharp saber beams slashed out. The saber aura carried an unending intent as it was about to tear the rogue cultivator into pieces. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared. Or rather, a sword beam appeared first. That sword beam was like a shooting star in the dark night, easily breaking Zhan Fong and He Li's saber beams. "Who is it?" The 2 of them were shocked. Someone actually came out to cause trouble at this time. And that sword beam just now didn't seem to be very powerful, but it was able to easily shatter their saber beams. This was not simple. The person who came was most likely a middle stage or even a late stage spirit cultivator. At this moment, a figure carrying an ink-colored spirit sword slowly walked over. With every step he took, the killing intent on his body became more obvious. Furthermore, his killing intent was locked onto Zhan Fong and Healy. Zhan Fong immediately shouted, "Who are you? How dare you interfere with our horizontal water fortress?" However, before he could finish his sentence, the other party had already stabbed at him with his sword. This sword was very strange. It did not have any sword chi, sword intent, or sword beam. It was just as fast as a rainbow. What was even stranger was that the sword actually flashed with a blurry light. Following that, the sword blade pierced through Zhan Fong's throat. Instant kill with one sword. This person was naturally Lung Shichi. The sword technique he used just now was the very ordinary startling rainbow sword style, But when he stabbed with his sword, he used two spiritual techniques at the same time. To be more precise, it was two illusions: soul intimidation technique and heart-seizing technique. When he went to save Nine Leave in Donglin County, Nine Leave had controlled 3 disciples of the Extreme Fire Manor in an instant, allowing Leng Shiqi to kill them in 2 moves. Since then, he had been wondering if he could do the same. Coincidentally, he had learned several illusions in the illusory spirit's secret realm, including the soul intimidation technique and the heart-seizing technique. The soul intimidation technique was an illusion that could intimidate the soul. It could infinitely magnify the deepest fear in your heart, causing the victim to fall into a deep fear. The heart-seizing technique would make the victim think that their heart had been taken away. What would happen to a person without a heart? They would die. Therefore, the person who was hit by the heart-seizing technique would be stiff and unable to move. When Leng Shiqi stabbed with his sword, he used these 2 illusions on Zhan Fang at the same time. These 2 illusions had already been cultivated to the great perfection realm by Leng Shiqi and could be activated in an instant. In addition, Leng Shiqi's mental strength was abnormally strong. Not only did he have the spiritual illusion realm, but he had also recently absorbed the souls of several spiritual pulse realm cultivators. His mental strength was so strong that even a spiritual pulse realm cultivator in the late stage might not be comparable to him. In addition, he had already opened 9 spiritual pulses of the 5-god flowing light technique, which greatly increased the power of his illusions. In an instant, Zhan Fang was hit by 2 illusions at the same time. Therefore, Zhan Fang was killed in an instant without even using his protective spirit qi. Zhan Fang slowly fell to the ground with a frightened expression. Leng Shiqi took the opportunity to hook his mustard seed bag. Then, a light green soul that others could not see entered his body. This sudden turn of events left He Li and the rogue cultivator dumbfounded. The first to react was the rogue cultivator. He exclaimed and turned to run. However, Leng Shiqi took a few steps and placed the ink jade sword on his neck. As for He Li, he also woke up at this time. He also knew that what he had to do now was to escape. However, a bone sword stopped him. A dark-skinned girl holding a bone sword came towards him. The bone sword exuded a dense cold aura. Before it even got close, it made people feel cold all over. This cold was not caused by cold air, but the kind of cold that was similar to that of a corpse. A light blue protective spirit qi immediately appeared around He Li's body. With a slash of the spirit sword in his hand, 3 ripple-like sword rays whizzed out. Delta Origi's left hand reached out and her entire arm instantly turned gray. Immediately, white bone claws appeared and directly shattered the 3 sword rays. He Li still wanted to resist, but his body suddenly froze and his eyes dimmed. Immediately, Delta Origi's bone sword pierced his heart. Chapter 281. Delta Origi said with a little displeasure, "I can also kill him. Let's end the battle quickly." Leng Shiqi said. Just now, it was because he had used the illusion to control He Li again that he was easily stabbed to death by Delta Origi. When the rogue cultivator saw that the 2 people from the Transverse Water Stronghold had died, he felt a wave of joy in his heart. Just now, they wanted to kill him and share his resources, but now, they were the ones who died. However, although this person was happy, he was not happy. Because his life was still in the hands of others. It was just a change of 2 people. Moreover, the 2 of them could kill the people from the Transverse Water Stronghold in the blink of an eye. Of course, they could kill him easily. "Sir, how should I address you?" Leng Shiqi asked him in an old man's voice. "Ping Buhong." Leng Shiqi asked, "What are you doing at the Southern Divine Peak?" Ping Buhong had just opened his mouth to say something when the black jade sword on his neck emitted a faint sword qi and cut through his skin. Ping Buhong's heart trembled and he immediately dispelled what he was about to say. "I'm here to kill Ozu." Leng Shiqi thought to himself, as expected. Then he sneered, "However, with your little ability, even if you meet Ozu, you're just here to die." Ping Buhong's face turned green and red, but what Leng Shiqi said was the truth, so he could only say, "I still have 3 good friends." We'll split up and look for OZU's traces. I originally wanted to follow the people from the Transverse Water Stronghold to see if I could get any useful information, but I didn't expect to be discovered by them long ago. Then you don't know where OZU is? Lung Shichi's tone was a little cold. Ping Buohong immediately denied it. No, following these two people still has some gains. They said that many people have already set up an ambush at the peak. As long as OZU appears, they will definitely be able to capture him alive. Therefore, OZU is definitely not at the peak right now. The southern spirit peak was so big that it would be hard to find him even if he excluded the peak. Lung Shichi knew that he wouldn't be able to get any valuable information from this Ping Buohong. At this moment, Delta Origi said, "Do you know how many people are coming to kill OZU?" This. Ping Buohong paused and said, "I don't know the exact number, but from what I know, there are over 100 loose cultivators, and the number is increasing every day. Just the rogue cultivators alone numbered in the hundreds. There were also people from other small factions that were not included. These people were all at the Spirit Pulse realm." Lung Shichi and Delta Origi's faces darkened. Their goal was to assassinate OZU. Of course, it would be best if they could capture him alive. However, there were still so many spirit cultivators in front of them. The difficulty of this mission had already far exceeded that of a 4-star mission. Seeing that Lung Shichi and Delta Origi were silent, Ping Buohong whispered, "Then, can I go now?" "Sure, have a safe journey." After a few breaths of time, Lung Shichi familiarly dealt with the 3 corpses and absorbed their remnant souls. Delta Origi said in a deep voice, "What should we do? The more we delay, the less likely we will be able to complete the mission." "That's right, unless we can find OZU first." Lung Shichi also felt that this matter was not easy to handle. Fortunately, he still had a stupid method. "You have a way?" Delta Origi understood the meaning behind Lung Shichi's words. Lung Shichi pointed at his eyes and said, "My eyes can see the spirit energy aura within a few miles. I have seen OZU before and know his spirit energy aura. Next, we will search area by area. As long as he is sure to be in the Southern God Peak, we will be able to find him sooner or later. It's just that the Southern God Peak is too big, and OZU is not standing still, so this is just the stupidest method." Since the supercilious eyes had already been seen by Delta Origi, he had nothing to hide. When Delta Origi heard this, she stared at Lung Shichi's eyes for a while. "Your eyes are really amazing. Together with your Earth Escape technique, it is really an excellent assassination spirit technique. Although this method is a little stupid, it is the only way. I will have to trouble you." She knew that maintaining this kind of magical eye technique would definitely consume a lot of energy. Lung Shichi shook his head indifferently. Then, like a moving radar, he opened his supercilious eyes and wandered around the Southern God Peak. However, all the way until dawn, they still had nothing to show for it. Even Lung Shichi began to suspect that OZU had already left the Southern God Peak. Delta Origi also said helplessly, "Let's rest for a while first. OZU has been in the Southern God Peak for so long without being discovered. He must have some concealment methods. Since you can't find him, others won't be able to find him either." Lung Shichi closed his supercilious eyes. Even though his mental strength was incomparably strong, he still felt a little lightheaded at this moment. Just as Lung Shichi wanted to rest for a while, the sky suddenly lit up. Following that, countless dazzling rays of light of various colors sprinkled down, bathing the entire Southern God Peak in a rainbow-colored rain. It was so beautiful that it was unforgettable. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi stood quietly. The light seemed to have a magical power that calmed their anxious hearts. Delta Origi murmured, "So beautiful. Yeah. Let's go to the peak and take a look." "OZU, you can't? Okay, let's go." Lung Shichi suddenly changed his tone halfway. Just now, he almost became a steel-straight man. The two of them walked side by side. Their speed was not fast, and they met many people along the way. Basically, they were a man and a woman. However, Lung Shichi and Delta Origi were disguised as grandfather and grandson. In the eyes of others, It was a grandfather who brought his granddaughter to broaden her horizons. The higher they went, the denser the dazzling colors in the sky. It was even a little dazzling. Moreover, those streams of light were constantly changing, like tens of thousands of white clouds forming all kinds of shapes, which made people marvel. When Lung Shichi and Delta Origi arrived at the peak, there were already 200 to 300 people gathered here. These people were all intoxicated by the thousands of streams of light. Strangely, at this moment, the 5-god flowing light technique in Lung Shichi's body actually began to circulate on its own. Lung Shichi was shocked. His eyes flashed as he carefully looked at the countless colorful lights in the sky. This seemed to be similar to the scene in the illusory spirit's secret realm. He vaguely guessed why Ozu would come here. There must be something related to the divine dream palace on the southern god peak. In other words, Ozu was very likely here. Thinking of this, Lung Shichi immediately put on a wide cloak to cover the upper half of his face. Seeing his actions, Delta Origi also restrained her thoughts. Then, Lung Shichi activated his supercilious eyes. In the next moment, he found the aura that he had been searching for a long time in the crowd. Ozu. Chapter 282. Lung Shichi finally found Ozu's aura through the supercilious eyes. However, when he looked at Ozu, he saw a woman. A woman in her 30s or 40s with an ordinary appearance. Lung Shichi blinked hard, afraid that he had seen wrongly. At this moment he finally understood why no one had found Ozu in the southern god peak for such a long time. He was a young man disguised as a middle-aged woman. Who could find him? And if nothing went wrong, Ozu had always been near the peak. With his current appearance, no matter how many people were lying in ambush at the peak, it was impossible for them to think that he was Ozu. Therefore, Lung Shichi had directly ruled out the peak area last night. If it wasn't for the strange phenomenon in the sky, he probably wouldn't have come here. Delta Origi noticed Lung Shichi's strange behavior and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "I found Ozu." Lung Shichi quietly pointed at a person. Delta Origi's expression changed. She looked in the direction Lung Shichi was pointing at, but she didn't see Ozu. She quickly realized that Ozu must have disguised his appearance, so she couldn't tell which one was Ozu. Lung Shichi could only say, "It's that woman." Delta Origi raised her eyebrows and looked at the middle-aged woman with an ordinary appearance. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Are you sure you didn't see wrongly?" A person's appearance can be changed, but the aura of the spiritual power in their body can't be changed. It's indeed him. You didn't expect him to disguise himself as a woman, did you? Yes. Delta Origi said, "And it's so delicate. Whether it's his appearance or his body shape, you can't tell that he's actually a young man." Just as they focused their attention on Ozu and were about to find an opportunity to make a move, a loud shout came from not far away, "Ozu! Where are you running to?" Lung Shichi and Delta Origi were both shocked. Did the others also discover Ozu? However, to their surprise, Ozu also appeared on the other side. As soon as Ozu appeared, he immediately ran down the mountain. It seemed that his speed was not slow. Shwa. Among the people who were watching the phenomenon of heaven and earth, 90% of them turned their heads at the same time and swarmed out to chase after Ozu. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi froze for a moment, but an idea immediately emerged in their minds. Luring the tiger away from the mountain. The Ozu who had just appeared was definitely fake. His appearance was to lure away all the people who were chasing after Ozu. The two of them tacitly retreated to make way for the others. In the blink of an eye, there were only a dozen people left on the mountain peak. Other than the Lung Shichi and the Delta Origi, the other 10 or so people were all below the celestial realm. Clearly, they were here to admire the phenomenon. At this moment, many colorful flowers suddenly sprouted from the ground of the mountain peak. They looked even more beautiful against the endless stream of light in the sky. Lung Shichi, on the other hand, was shocked. "It's an illusion." His spiritual power surged, and pure spiritual power gushed out from between his brows, isolating the Delta Origi. As for the others on the mountain peak, they fell to the ground one by one. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi did not need to communicate and fell to the ground as well. At this moment, there was only a middle-aged woman left on the mountain peak. Seeing that everyone had either left or fallen to the ground, she quickly walked to the edge of the cliff and quickly formed a seal with her hands. Following that, streams of light emitted from this person's body, and they actually intertwined with the light in the sky. The aura of this middle-aged woman continued to rise, and soon reached the peak of the first level of the spirit pulse realm. Immediately, a soft sound came from Ozu's body. His cultivation had broken through to the second level of the spirit pulse realm. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi both noticed this. They knew that they could not delay any longer. Ozu did not know how to increase his cultivation so quickly, but the higher his cultivation, the more difficult it would be for Lung Shichi and Delta Origi to kill him. At this moment, two figures stabbed at Ozu from the left and right. Lung Shichi's black jade sword was wreaking havoc. The invisible meridian-piercing sword Qi and the faint blue frost sword Qi intertwined with each other, creating an unparalleled momentum. Delta Origi's 3,000 black hair turned into a head of silver hair. Her figure looked even thinner, but her cultivation aura skyrocketed. Her bone sword carried a dense aura of death as it pierced through the night sky towards Ozu. Ozu, who was absorbing the seven-colored light, did not expect that someone would ambush him at this moment. However, he never let his guard down. Ozu pointed his finger at the sky and then lightly tapped it down. Rays of seven-colored light shot down and turned into an exceptionally gorgeous seven-colored rain that enveloped the two of them. However, this exceptionally beautiful rain was filled with destructive murderous intent. Lung Shichi did not expect Ozu to be able to borrow the seven-colored light in the sky. He instantly activated the demonic beast blood pattern armor and attached 18 demonic patterns to the black jade sword. In the next moment, over 100 different sword Qis surged out, forming a huge vortex that wiped out an unknown amount of seven-colored flowing light. On the other side, several white bone shields appeared around Delta Origi's body to protect her. After one attack failed, Ozu unsheathed his spirit sword. He was an outstanding disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. Of course, he was best at swordsmanship. And Ozu's spirit sword was also a level 5 spirit weapon. Ozu gently waved his spirit sword, and in an instant, a dazzling sword light streaked across the night sky. The sword light suddenly split into two, and then into four. In the blink of an eye, sword light filled the sky and sprinkled down. Lung Shichi's eyes narrowed. He knew that most of these sword lights were just illusions, but it was this combination of real and fake that was the most troublesome. Fortunately, Lung Shichi was also proficient in illusion techniques. His majestic mental strength continued to surge, and in his eyes, the sword light that filled the sky dissipated by more than half. He sheathed his sword and swapped it for a saber. Then hundreds of green saber lights whizzed out and swallowed all the sword lights. Ozu frowned. He sensed that Lung Shichi was difficult to deal with, and then turned his gaze to Delta Origi. This time, Ozu finally moved. He came with his sword in hand, and his figure was constantly changing. Every time he took a step, a 9-petaled, 7-colored lotus flower would appear under his feet. In an instant, a huge lotus flower completely condensed from sword Qi suddenly appeared. Ozu pointed the tip of his sword, and the huge 7-colored lotus flower began to spin crazily. Countless 7-colored sword Qi shot out, and a layer of the ground on the peak was cut off. Such a powerful sword technique was actually used by Ozu, a spirit cultivator at the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. It was unbelievable. Lung Shichi suddenly had a thought. If Ozu could borrow the 7-colored light, why couldn't he? Then, Lung Shichi changed the cultivation technique in his body to the 5-god flowing light technique. He immediately sensed the power of the flowing light in the sky clearly. Facing the endless lotus sword Qi, Lung Shichi tilted his black jade sword. With a shake of his body, dozens of 7-colored illusions were scattered. Immediately, the 7-colored sword Qi that blotted out the sky and covered the earth erupted. When Ozu saw this, he exclaimed, "You are Zhuqiu." Chapter 283. The energy in Lung Shiqi's sword qi was actually of the same origin as Oziyu's lotus sword qi. The gigantic rainbow lotus in the sky and Lung Shiqi's rainbow sword qi devoured each other, and neither could do anything to the other. When Lung Shiqi heard Oziyu say the word Suachuyu, his heart skipped a beat. He circulated the 5-god flowing light technique with all his might, and his body lit up with a faint 5-colored light, confirming his identity. Oziyu bathed in the 7-colored light and laughed. Suachuyu, you want to obtain the inheritance of my cultivation technique, but I also want to obtain your cultivation technique. This place is specially designed to cultivate the 1,000 Revolutions illusory world technique. It is my home ground. Hearing this, Lung Shiqi also realized that although he could also mobilize the 7-colored light, it was much less than Oziyu's. He simulated the voice of Suachuyu and said, Oziyu, even if you are stronger than me, it will be very difficult for you to defeat me in a short period of time. With such a big commotion here, the people you deliberately lured away will return very quickly. At that time, even if you can activate the power of the 7-colored light, you won't be able to survive the siege of hundreds of spirit cultivators. Oziyu obviously realized this as well. He retracted his smile and a complicated expression flashed across his eyes. You're right, but if it really comes to that, I'll reveal your identity. At most, we'll die together. Lung Shiqi silently gave Delta Origi a look, telling her not to act rashly. He said to Oziyu, then why do we have to fight to the death here? Since you're here, it means that you've made other discoveries after leaving the illusory spirit realm. Why don't you share it with me? If you have any conditions, feel free to state them. Oziyu muttered to himself and said, it's not impossible to share, but you have to give me a portion of the cultivation technique you obtained first. And who is this girl? She's already at the Spirit Pulse realm at such a young age, and her combat strength is also very astonishing. What is her identity? Delta Origi raised her head and said, listen carefully, Oziyu was waiting for the next part. Most of his attention was on the Delta Origi. At this moment, 3 blood tattoos appeared on Lung Shiqi's forehead, and a silver-white cape appeared behind him. He used the Serene Fiend blood tattoo and the Holy Silver Deer's Beast Chi battle tattoo. He held the Qing Lin saber in his hand and turned into a black and white phantom, directly arriving in front of Oziyu. Oziyu did not expect the Lung Shiqi to suddenly attack. He roared as if he had gone mad. With a slash of the spirit sword in his hand, the 7-colored light in the air poured down. Thousands of 7-colored sword qi sealed off the entire peak. Even a spirit aperture realm expert would not be able to do such a thing. However, the Lung Shiqi had also attracted a lot of 7-colored light to his body. Just as the boundless sword qi fell, the spirit saber was unsheathed. Among the sword qi that filled the sky, a cold saber light suddenly flashed. That saber light was just a flash. It was not eye-catching at all in the dazzling 7-colored light. However, it was this inconspicuous saber light that instantly shattered all the 7-colored sword qi. Even the streams of light were swept away. A large hole suddenly appeared in the 7-colored sky. It was as if only that saber light was allowed to exist in this world. A flash in the pan. This was the flash in the pan of Lung Shiqi's fusion of the saber drawing technique and the full moon swift slash. With this move, the demonic beast blood tattoo armor, beast chi battle tattoo, and serene fiend blood tattoo on Lung Shiqi's body all dissipated. His body suddenly felt weak. This saber contained all his spirit power, strength, blood chi, and spiritual power. Now, the spirit power in his body had been emptied of more than 70 to 80%. On the other side, with a ding sound, the rank 5 spirit sword in Oziyu's hand was cut into 2. A slender saber mark appeared on his face, almost splitting his face into 2 halves. Oziyu's eyes seemed to have lost their spirit. For a moment, he was stunned. If it wasn't for the rank 5 spirit sword blocking for him, his head would have been separated from his body. This Suachuyu was actually so strong. Even though he had mobilized the power of the heaven and earth vision, he still almost died at the hands of the other party. As an outstanding disciple of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect and the inheritance of the Divine Illusion Palace, Ozu naturally had a sense of pride. But now, Leng Shiqi smashed his arrogance to smithereens. Ozu was stunned, but someone else was not. That was Delta Origi. At first, Delta Origi was also shocked by Leng Shiqi's heaven-splitting saber strike. However, Leng Shiqi had given her too many surprises. She already had some resistance, so she quickly reacted. This was the best time to kill Ozu. Delta Origi's entire body emitted cracking sounds as if countless bones were dislocated. Then, she actually pulled out her spine from her back. She held the spine like a sword or a whip. Then, dozens of weak and boneless sword shadows pierced towards Ozu with a dense aura of death. What was even more terrifying was that those sword shadows actually emitted a faint layer of ghostly fire. Leng Shiqi's heart skipped a beat when he saw this move. The power of this sword move had already far surpassed a rank 4 spiritual skill. It was probably a rank 5 spiritual skill. He couldn't help but feel a little jealous. Having a heavenly origin realm master was indeed different. Ozu finally woke up. When he saw Delta Origi's attack, he immediately exclaimed, "Ghost Bone Cold Fire Sword. Who is the Blood Cloak Pavilion's Bone Devil to you?" Of course, Delta Origi wouldn't answer him. She didn't need to answer a dead person. Ozu wanted to resist, but the colorful light around him had already been swept away by Leng Shiqi. He was now an injured second-level Spirit Vein Realm cultivator. Without a spirit sword, how could he resist Delta Origi's Ghost Bone Cold Fire Sword? At this moment, a ray of golden light shot out from the east. The sun had come out. Ozu immediately revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He muttered, "The time has finally come. I just don't know if it's true or not." Seeing that Delta Origi's sword was about to reach him, he couldn't hesitate anymore. He gritted his teeth and jumped off the cliff. Delta Origi's sword pierced through the air. She couldn't help but frown. Ozu's actions were clearly beyond her expectations. Leng Shiqi swallowed 2 pills to recover his spirit energy in a row and quickly walked to the edge of the cliff. His white eyes suddenly revealed a look of shock. Delta Origi turned her head and asked, "What did you find?" Leng Shiqi said, "Something's wrong. I don't see Ozu's spirit energy aura. My supercilious eyes can see within a radius of 4 to 5 miles. It's impossible for him to fall so far in such a short period of time." "You mean he disappeared?" Countless possibilities flashed through Leng Shiqi's mind. He thought that Ozu seemed to have muttered something before he jumped off the cliff, and he jumped off the cliff at sunrise. Was this all a coincidence? His eyes flashed as he said to Delta Origi, "Wait for me here." With that, Leng Shiqi also jumped off the cliff. What he didn't expect was that Delta Origi also jumped down. Chapter 284. After Leng Shiqi, Delta Origi, and Ozu all jumped off the cliff, a large group of people rushed back to the peak. These people had been lured away by Ozu from the beginning. That Ozu was very fast, and it took them some effort to catch him. However, they discovered that Ozu was a fake. That person was only wearing a human skin mask that looked exactly like Ozu's face. It was also at that moment that they all sensed the huge spiritual fluctuations coming from the peak and turned back. Unfortunately, other than a dozen people who had fallen to the ground, there was no one else on the peak. Everyone's faces were filled with the word dumbfounded. Leng Shiqi, Delta Origi, and Ozu were already in a secret realm. After they fell off the cliff, a hole opened at the intersection of the sun's golden light and the 7-colored light. They fell into this secret realm through that hole. This secret realm was not big, only about 5 or 6 miles in radius. Looking at the sky, the secret realm sky was surging with 7-colored light like clouds. In the center of the secret realm, there was a thatched hut, surrounded by some flowers, grass, and fruit trees. Other than that, there was nothing else. At this moment, Ozu was staring at Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi. Leng Shiqi stared at Delta Origi. In Ozu's opinion, he knew the secret here, and at the same time, He dared to jump down because he was gambling. Lung Shiqi and Oziu dared to jump? What lunatics! From Lung Shiqi's point of view, he had guessed that the southern divine peak was related to the illusory spirit's secret realm. He and Oziu both had the inheritance of the divine dream palace. Since Oziu dared to jump, he dared to jump as well. However, Delta Origi also jumped down, which really scared him out of his wits. If this secret realm could only accept people with the divine dream palace's cultivation method, Delta Origi would have been smashed to pieces. Fortunately, Delta Origi could enter this secret realm as well. As for Delta Origi, she wasn't that pretentious. She knew Lung Shiqi the best. Since he dared to jump, it meant that there wouldn't be any danger, so she jumped down as well. Therefore, she was also very puzzled. Why was Lung Shiqi staring at her like that? Thus, up until now, the three of them were in a state of confusion. Gu San was the first to make a move. She held her bone sword, and a faint ghost fire appeared on the blade. She was about to attack. However, Oziu shouted loudly, "Wait!" Oziu's throat, O's throat, was still locked. The tip of the sword was still locked of Oz's throat. At this moment, Oziu suddenly snapped his fingers. Immediately, the seven-colored stream of light in the sky kept circling above his head. This place has limitless power for me to use. You are no match for me here. But Oziu pointed at Lung Shiqi and said, he can also mobilize a portion of the power of light. Although he doesn't have as much as I do, there are two of you, so I admit that I can't kill you. However, you can't kill me either. Delta Origi snorted coldly, how do you know if you don't try? While Oziu was speaking, Lung Shiqi had been secretly observing this small secret realm. Then he said, you're right. The power of light here far surpasses that of the outside world. Even if we use all our strength, it will be difficult to kill you. If you have something to say, just say it. Oziu smiled lightly and said, sure enough, it's easier to talk to a man. Delta Origi's face darkened, but she didn't say anything. Oziu said, what I mean is that there's no need for us to fight to the death. I still say the same thing. Why don't you and I share our cultivation methods? You came to kill me because you want my cultivation method inheritance. I can also tell you that the cultivation method I obtained is the illusory technique of 1,000 revolutions. You're also someone who obtained the inheritance of a cultivation method. If I'm not wrong, the cultivation method you obtained is also sealed. So, you should know that even if you force me, I can only give you the first level of the cultivation method at most. You can forget about getting the rest. Lung Shiqi nodded and said, that's true. What do you want? Zhuqiu? No, you're not Zhuqiu. Even your current appearance is not your true appearance. Since Lung Shiqi came to the Southern God Peak with the identity of Old Man Lu, he was wearing the demonic beast blood pattern armor when he fought with Oziu. Oziu used the cultivation method to determine that he was Zhuqiu. Now, Lung Shiqi revealed the appearance of Old Man Lu without the cover of the armor. Naturally, he revealed that he was not Zhuqiu. Oziu said, I'm not interested in your true identity. Why don't we sit on a business deal? This can be considered a little sincerity from me. You want to exchange cultivation methods, right? Lung Shiqi had already guessed what Oziu was going to say. Oziu nodded and said, that's right. You and I are both at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. We only have the first level of the cultivation method. Our cultivation methods come from the same source. If we can verify each other, we will definitely benefit a lot. Lung Shiqi did not say anything. Oziu continued, you can think about it first. Also, this little girl should be an assassin from the Blood Garment Pavilion. Oziu changed the topic to Delta Origi. He recognized the Delta Origi's moves on the cliff, so it was easy for him to guess her identity. What you want is my head. I can give it to you as well. Oziu's words were shocking. He actually said such a sentence. Lung Shiqi and Delta Origi were confused. Just now, Oziu said that there was no need to fight to the death and exchange cultivation methods with Lung Shiqi. Now, he wanted to give away his head? What was Oziu selling in his gourd? Lung Shiqi suddenly thought of the Oziu, who had led everyone away at the beginning. He said, "Do you want to use a disguise technique to disguise yourself? Do you think the Blood Garment Pavilion and the employer are fools?" Oziu snorted coldly and said, "The one outside is just an idiot who was controlled by my illusion technique. Look at this." He took out a dark red square box from his mustard seed bag. Lung Shichi took it and opened it. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Inside the box was a head. Oziu's head. Oziu said, "Don't make a fuss. This head is not disguised in any way. You can take it to report." "If this head is real, then who are you?" Delta Origi asked coldly. "Who said he's real? I just said that there's no disguise. I'm Oziu, and the owner of this head is Ozisu. He's my twin brother." Lung Shichi secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. He said, "You've already prepared this head, haven't you?" The Southern Divine Peak is in Mukan County. As everyone knows, this is the headquarters of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Those sanctimonious people from the Thousand Illusion Sword sect will definitely find assassins from the Blood Garment Pavilion to kill me. Although he did not answer directly, the meaning of his words was already very obvious. Oziu had already made all the plans before coming to the Southern Divine Peak. He had already expected that the Blood Garment Pavilion would kill him. Even if he could use the seven-colored flowing light to fight against the enemy, if the assassins from the Blood Garment Pavilion failed, there would be stronger assassins coming next time. Sooner or later he would be killed by the assassins. Therefore, he prepared the head of his twin brother. He was good at illusions and could completely fake his death to escape. Thinking of this, Lung Shichi and Delta Origi had to admit that Oziu was indeed ruthless and shrewd. Chapter 285. In the small secret realm, Lung Shichi and Delta Origi fell into silence. The main purpose of their trip was to assassinate Oziu. If possible, it would be best to obtain the inheritance of his cultivation method. Now that Oziu had taken out a head that could be passed off as the real thing, they could take it to hand in their mission. As for the cultivation method, they could also exchange it with him. All of this seemed to be good. For Oziu, he had not only escaped the pursuit of the Blood Clothing Pavilion, but also obtained Lung Shichi's cultivation method. It was killing two birds with one stone. In this way, this was really a win-win deal. However, Lung Shichi still had a question in his heart. Your twin brother's head can be temporarily deceived, but as long as someone finds out about your brother's death, they will still suspect that you used the flower transplant technique to fake your death. A hint of hatred appeared on Oziu's face. "Do you think that my family will still be safe after I become a traitor of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect? Do you think that this head is the one that I killed my own brother? This is him, he gave it to me of his own accord." Oziu's eyes were instantly filled with countless blood vessels. His handsome face also became ferocious, and his entire body emitted an astonishing amount of hatred. Lung Shichi and Delta Origi looked at each other. At this moment, their hearts couldn't help but fluctuate. It seemed that there was an unknown secret behind Oziu's betrayal of the sect. However, Lung Shichi wasn't interested in these things. Since there was no flaw in this head, he accepted it. This action also meant that he agreed to Oziu's suggestion. Seeing this, Oziu slowly calmed down and said, "You can cultivate here for the next 2 or 3 months." "What? 2 or 3 months?" Lung Shichi and Delta Origi were shocked when they heard this. Oziu said, "The entrance to this small secret realm will only open when the 7-colored stream of light appears on the southern god peak and the first ray of sunlight intersects. So if you want to go out, you can only wait for the next time." This. Lung Shichi didn't know what to say. 2 or 3 months was not a long time. Moreover, he had a habit of storing a lot of food and water in his mustard seed bag. Therefore, it was not impossible for him to live here for a period of time. But the missions they accepted had a time limit. 1 month's time limit. By the time they left, the mission would have expired. Furthermore, Wu Xiang had told him not to run around randomly. It was not a big deal for him to run to the Southern Divine Peak. After all, it was not that far away. But if he were to stay here for 2 to 3 months, he would have to endure Wu Xiang's wrath when he got out. Lung Shichi frowned and asked, "Is there no other way?" Ozu answered firmly, "This is actually the place where one of the 3 palace masters of the Divine Illusion Palace, Thousand Chance Illusion, went into closed-door cultivation. It was a coincidence that I was able to come here. Apart from the method I just mentioned, there was no other way. Besides, the spirit power here is even denser than in the Thousand Illusion Sword sect. Especially for you, you can use the power of the flowing light here to quickly increase your cultivation. What a great opportunity this is, and you're actually not happy." With that said, Leng Shiqi could only accept this fact. Moreover, as Ozu said, this place was indeed a treasured place for Leng Shiqi to cultivate. At this moment, he finally understood that Ozu had spent so much effort to come here to cultivate. At the same time, he could also avoid being hunted down. It was indeed a good place. But how did Ozu know about this place? How did he know the way to enter the secret realm? Could this have something to do with his betrayal of the sect? Questions appeared in Leng Shiqi's mind one after another. He even began to doubt the authenticity of Ozu falling in love with the witch of the demonic path. However, not long ago he was still fighting to the death with Ozu. In the end, they were still enemies. Therefore, even if he asked, Ozu would not say anything. Next, Leng Shiqi and Ozu exchanged cultivation techniques. He also obtained the first level of the illusory world art of 1,000 revolutions. Then, Ozu ignored them and went into the thatched hut to cultivate. Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi walked to the side of the secret realm. He said, "How trustworthy do you think Ozu's words are?" Delta Origi replied, "It doesn't matter whether we believe the rest or not. Now that we've gotten what we want, it's enough as long as the matter of getting out is true." Leng Shiqi nodded. "During this period of time, we must not let our guard down. After all, this is his home ground." In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. On this day, Leng Shiqi and Ozu sat cross-legged facing each other. Their eyes were shining with a 7-colored light. Delta Origi was playing with a white bone dagger in boredom. Obviously, she was used to this kind of behavior from the two of them. After a long while, Ozu snorted. His face turned slightly pale, and his eyes returned to normal. He sighed softly and said, "Sigh, I lost again. Brother Leng is still better." Leng Shiqi chuckled and said, "I only have the advantage of mental power. In terms of control of illusion, Brother O is still better." Ozu waved his hand and said, all right. A loss is a loss. Let's call it a day. Then we'll take our leave first." Leng Shiqi then got up and returned to his hut with Delta Origi. In the past 3 months, Leng Shiqi and Ozu had gotten to know each other through fighting. In the beginning, they were still on guard against each other. Later, as a deal, they guided each other's cultivation techniques. The two of them were both good at swordsmanship and illusion. When they had nothing to do, they would spar a little. Gradually, they felt like they had met each other earlier. Now, they would routinely spar with swordsmanship and illusion every day. However, Leng Shiqi won more than he lost. Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi could not be used as beds and blankets all day long in this secret realm. Thus, Leng Shiqi used the Hand of Earth to build 2 mud houses. These days were perhaps the most comfortable period of time for the two of them. There was no killing, no crisis, and no deception. Every day, they cultivated and sparred. When they had nothing to do, they could chat. Their days were very quiet. Fortunately, there were many fruit trees in this secret realm, so they did not have to worry about food. Since Leng Shiqi also cultivated the 1,000 revolutions illusory world technique, he had a unique advantage in cultivating here. After consuming the 3 revolutions spirit melting pill, just 2 days ago, his cultivation was already at the 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm. This speed was even faster than Ozu's. Right now, Ozu was still stuck between the 2nd and 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm. He was still troubled by opening his spiritual pulse. The main reason was that Leng Shiqi's spiritual pulse had already been opened. All he needed to do was to accumulate spiritual power. In this small secret realm, the spiritual power was already very rich. He could also absorb the 7-colored flowing light and convert it into spiritual power. That was why he had such a terrifying cultivation speed. Delta Origi's progress was also not small. Although she could not actively absorb the 7-colored flowing light, even if she passively absorbed it in this environment, her cultivation had reached the peak of the first level. It was a pity that Leng Shiqi had also taught her the introductory chapter of the 5-God flowing light technique, but Delta Origi could not comprehend it. She did not have the talent in illusion. However, just after Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi took a few steps, the 7-colored light in the sky above the secret realm suddenly surged like the wind and clouds. They looked at each other and saw a touch of joy in each other's eyes. The exit of the secret realm was about to open. Chapter 286. At this time, Oziu walked over. He hesitated for a moment before saying to Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi, "You must be careful when you go out. There might be experts eyeing you." Leng Shiqi raised his eyebrows. Oziu seemed to know something. He asked, "What do you mean?" Oziu sighed deeply and said, "Forget it, there's no harm in telling you this. This is about my betrayal of the sect." Oziu then told them the whole story of his betrayal of the sect. Leng Shiqi and Delta Origi were both shocked and bewildered. It turned out that ever since Oziu obtained the inheritance of the cultivation method in the illusory spirit's secret realm, he had fallen into a deep vortex. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect's ultimate skill, the Thousand Illusion Sword art, was a mysterious sword manual that combined swordsmanship and illusion. However, how many people in the world could be proficient in both swordsmanship and illusion at the same time? Not to mention combining the two. Hundreds of years ago, the founder of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect, the Thousand Illusion Sword Sovereign, was a talented person. The Thousand Illusion Sword sect was also promoted to one of the 8 Wastelands weapon paths under his hands. However, in the past few hundred years, although the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had produced a few experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage, none of them had been able to fully comprehend the Thousand Illusion Sword art. No one could practice the fundamental cultivation method of a sect, so the Thousand Illusion Sword sect had been relying on its foundation. In the past 200 years, there had been no experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage. Now, the head of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect was old to the point of decay. Once the current head died, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect would no longer have any experts of the Heavenly Yuan stage. It was very likely that they would fall out of the 8 Wastelands weapon paths. Therefore, the Thousand Illusion Sword sect urgently needed another profound cultivation method to save their ending. The cultivation method that Oziu obtained in the illusory spirit's secret realm became their hope. As soon as Oziu returned to the sect, he was persuaded by a group of elders to hand over the cultivation method. Oziu could understand the difficulties of the sect, but he only had the first level of the Thousand Revolutions illusory world technique. The rest was sealed in the depths of his mind. What he said was the truth, but when it fell into the ears of others, it became perfunctory. The upper echelons of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect were unhappy, but Oziu was their future hope, so it wasn't good to make things too stiff. Thus, Oziu was placed under house arrest. Every day, people came to persuade him. But one day, for some reason, Oziu had a conflict with a deacon elder who came to persuade him. He even killed 2 of the elder's disciples. Once this matter came out, it blew up. Oziu was captured on the spot and sent to the torture hall. According to him, he did make a move at that time, but he was actually controlled by someone. Some people believed what he said, but the majority of the people still didn't believe it. There were even some who suggested searching Oziu's memories and directly extracting the cultivation method. However, this method could easily cause Oziu's mental strength to collapse and directly become an idiot, thus destroying a peerless genius. What was laughable was that there were actually quite a few people who agreed with this approach. In their opinion, as long as the sect had a cultivation method, they would have a foundation, which was equivalent to having a chance to rise again. Even if he had to sacrifice a genius, it would be worth it. This matter was too important, and the upper echelons of the Thousand Illusions Sword sect argued endlessly about it. And the strange thing was, just when Oziu thought that he couldn't escape death, someone actually quietly let him go. and escorted him all the way out of the Thousand Illusions sword sect. After that, he made his preparations and went all the way to the southern divine peak, where he met Ling Shichi and Delta Origi. As for the matter of him falling in love with the demonic path, it was purely false. Hearing this, Ling Shichi's first reaction was that there was a ghost. In the first half of this story, it was still understandable. A sect that had already begun to decline, in order to protect the position of the 8 desolate weapons path, it was indeed possible for them to interrogate their disciples about their cultivation method. However, from the fact that Ozu had suddenly killed someone and was let go, it was as if there was a pair of big hands behind all of this. In that case, the person behind Ozu's arrival at the southern divine peak must have known. Now that Ozu had suddenly disappeared here for 3 months, it was very likely that the other party had set up a lot of spies in the southern divine peak to look for Ozu. If Ling Shichi and Delta Origi suddenly appeared, it was indeed possible for them to be targeted. Ling Shichi said at this time, "We will be careful about this matter. Brother, it's best if you don't go out casually." Ozu said, "Go out? I won't go out until I reach the Spirit Aperture Realm." Spirit Aperture Realm? Ozu actually wanted to cultivate to the Spirit Aperture Realm in one go. However, even if he cultivated in this secret realm, it would take him at least 2 or 3 years. In other words, he would have to stay in this uninhabited place for 2 or 3 years. Ling Shichi and Delta Origi couldn't help but be moved. Especially Delta Origi, she knew the pain of cultivating alone the best. At this moment, she couldn't help but admire Ozu. At this time, a crack appeared in the air of the small secret realm. Ling Shichi knew that the time had come and couldn't be delayed any longer. He cupped his fists and said, "See you later." "See you later." Then, Ling Shichi brought Delta Origi into the crack. Outside. Today was the day when the southern divine peak appeared again, and it still attracted many people to come and watch. However, what no one noticed was that 2 figures suddenly appeared on the side of the cliff at the top of the mountain. After Ling Shichi and Delta Origi left the secret realm, Delta Origi threw out a bone whip and deeply embedded it into the mountain wall. She pulled hard, and Ling Shichi was stuck to the mountain wall. Then Ling Shichi used the Hand of Earth, and the 2 of them disappeared into the mountain wall. Their series of actions were all discussed in advance. Their movements were very fast and very quiet, but that little bit of sound still attracted the attention of someone. This was a middle-aged man in his 40s. His cheeks were very old, his skin was dark, and his face was fierce. Originally, he was also admiring the light in the sky, but suddenly his ears twitched slightly, and he immediately heard the sound on the mountain wall. Then he closed his eyes and carefully sensed. Soon, he noticed a very faint spiritual energy fluctuation under his feet. The corner of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile, and he turned around and walked down the peak. Not long after, Ling Shichi brought Delta Origi from underground to the mountainside of the southern divine peak and returned to the surface. Delta Origi let out a sigh of relief and said, "We're finally out." Ling Shichi also laughed in his heart. Back then, they accepted the mission to assassinate Ozu. First, it was to give Delta Origi blood drops, and second, it was to bring her out to take a look. In the end, not only did they not obtain any blood drops, but they were also trapped for 3 months. At this time, it was raining. The originally colorless rain turned into a rainbow-colored rain under the 7-colored light. It was beautiful. This made the 2 of them feel a little better. However, at this moment, Ling Shichi was shocked. He suddenly felt an extreme sense of danger. It turned out that at some point in time, a huge ice hand had already fallen down with extreme cold power. Chapter 287. The giant ice palm smashed down with the power of extreme ice, turning the surrounding trees into ice sculptures in an instant. Ling Shichi and Delta Origi were both shocked. They were at the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm, but they felt as if they had fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cellar. Even the spiritual energy in their bodies was about to be frozen. The person who attacked was at least a Spirit Aperture realm expert. Although they were shocked, they didn't slow down. As they retreated, several bone shields appeared around Delta Origi to protect her. Lung Shichi instantly activated his demonic beast blood rune armor and sent out 6 palm shadows. The palm shadows immediately attracted the surrounding rainbow light. Then, the 6 palm shadows merged into one and turned into a huge rainbow palm shadow. The rainbow palm shadow rose into the sky and collided with the giant ice palm. Boom! The two forces exploded. With Lung Shichi as the center, the ground within a radius of 10 meters cracked and sank. His rainbow palm shadow had already dissipated, leaving only a thin layer of the giant ice palm, but it still smashed down. Lung Shichi let out a low roar, and flames suddenly appeared around his feet. The flames spiraled into the air, forming a huge pillar of fire that soared into the sky. This was a spiritual technique that Lung Shichi created over the past 3 months by combining the fire symbol technique and spirit attack, flame bombardment. Chi, the intertwining of ice and fire caused a large amount of fog. Fortunately, the giant ice palm was finally neutralized. Lung Shichi roared, "Run!" At this time, Delta Origi's bone shields had already turned into ice shields. She directly gave up on the bone shields and turned to run without hesitation. She knew that with her strength, there was no room for her to intervene. Instead, she would be a burden to Lung Shichi. She believed that Lung Shichi, who could use the power of the rainbow light, would have a way to escape. As Delta Origi fled, she also crushed the pendant that she wore. You can actually use part of the world. It's really hard to imagine. A figure appeared in front of Lung Shichi. Strangely, the raindrops from the sky disappeared automatically when they were a few inches away from him. He was the skinny and dark man who had noticed the commotion just now. "Who are you? Why do you want to kill us?" Lung Shichi asked in a deep voice. "You've seen Ozu." Lung Shichi was about to deny it, but the skinny and dark man said, "You don't have to deny it. You have his scent on you. Tell me where he is." "If I tell you, I won't have to die?" The man said, "Maybe." Lung Shichi sneered, but in fact, he was constantly thinking of a way to escape. "Don't tell me you're still thinking of escaping? That was just a casual attack from me. I just wanted to keep you alive." The man said casually. Then he stretched out a finger, and a dark blue cold air condensed on his finger. No, that wasn't frigid chi, but frigid wind. Gang's spirit realm. Lung Shichi was shocked. He was facing a master of Gang's spirit realm. "Put away all your thoughts and take me to Ozu. This is your only chance to survive." "Oh, that's right, there's also that little girl. She has an ice imprint on her body. With just a thought, I can instantly kill her." "Okay, I promise you." Lung Shichi nodded with hatred. "Ozu is..." Lung Shichi suddenly exclaimed, "What is this?" It turned out that colorful petals were falling around them quietly, and the number was increasing. The skinny and dark man also noticed these petals, and a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. But at this fleeting moment, Lung Shichi's figure suddenly changed into hundreds of colorful phantoms. The hundreds of phantoms immediately scattered in all directions and fled madly. Seeing this scene, the skinny and dark man was shocked even though he was in Gang's spirit realm, because he couldn't tell which phantoms were real for a while. He had the ability to sense the breath, but the hundreds of phantoms all had the breath of the real one. He had never seen such a brilliant illusory skill. The skinny and dark man snorted. He pointed his finger as a sword. In an instant, endless ice sword aura flew out violently, and the area within a radius of 1,000 feet was covered by the ice sword aura. Most of Lung Shichi's colorful phantoms were destroyed in an instant. But the rest of the phantoms were still fleeing in all directions, and they were all very fast. The skinny and dark man had not found the real one yet, and his face became ferocious. The ice sword aura burst out under his control. The horrible Gang spirit broke out, and the whole mountainside immediately became a mess. The Gang spirit destroyed the phantoms one after another. When the last one dissipated, the skinny and dark man was stunned. There was still no real one. All the phantoms were fake. At this time, the skinny and dark man suddenly remembered that when he was on the peak, he had sensed the breath of Lung Shichi and Delta Origi underground. He immediately understood. Just now, the real one of Leng Shiqi must have drilled into the ground and escaped. The skinny and dark man was furious. He was fooled by a junior in spiritual pulse realm. Ah! A long sword flashing with cold light appeared in the skinny and dark man's hand. It was a 6th-level spiritual weapon. He stood with the sword in his hand, and his whole body burst out an amazing sword intent. Go to hell! The skinny and dark man's long sword suddenly stabbed down. Endless ice sword intent poured into the ground, and the whole underground became an ice hell, whether it was the soil or the gravel. After a few seconds, a figure in demon armor drilled out of the ground awkwardly. Of course, it was Leng Shiqi. At this moment, his back was covered in frost. Even if he tried his best, he couldn't get rid of it. Fortunately, the demonic beast blood pattern armor didn't let the coldness enter his body for the time being. The moment he drilled out of the ground, he stepped on the black mist and immediately activated the Holy Silver Deer's beast essence battle pattern. He turned into a black and white stream of light and fled as fast as he could. The skinny and dark man swung his sword, and a several-meter-long ice sword intent whizzed out. It directly tore through the sky and cut through space. As the ice sword intent approached, Leng Shiqi suddenly felt that death was coming. Just as he was about to use fleeting epiphyllum to fight for his life, a strange scene appeared. Suddenly, the void seemed to have frozen. Whether it was the rain, the swaying trees, or the huge ice sword intent, they all strangely stopped moving. Even the skinny and dark man didn't move. The only one who could move was Leng Shiqi. He didn't know what had happened. He only knew that now was the best time for him to escape. No, there was still one person who could move. It was a slightly fat man. He was dressed in bloody clothes and walked slowly. He stretched out a hand and clenched it. The arrogant master in Gang Spirit Realm directly burst into a cloud of blood mist. My disciple is not someone trash like you can touch. Chapter 288. The killer was Leng Shiqi's cheap master, Wu Xiang. Leng Shiqi was really horrified. He was horrified by Wu Xiang's strength. The one who chased after him was a master of Gang Spirit Realm. He was a master of supreme power who could establish a sect and a second-class force outside. If Leng Shiqi hadn't been able to mobilize part of the power of the colorful flowing light, he would have been killed by the ice handprint. However, Wu Xiang was able to destroy such an expert with a flip of his hand. This was the strength of a master of oneness of heaven and men realm. This was the strength of a killer of bloody underworld. While Leng Shiqi was still in shock, Wu Xiang slapped him away. Wu Xiang said in a sharp voice, "I told you not to run around, but you ran directly to South Divine Peak. What are you doing here? You're so young but you're so scheming. You came here and hid for 3 months. Do you know how worried I was?" Leng Shiqi was a little touched when he heard this. But Wu Xiang continued, "Do you know that I went to ask for a good fortune for you, but in the end, you disappeared. I've become a joke. Don't I care about my reputation?" Leng Shiqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was touched for nothing, but it was true that Wu Xiang did save his life. But why did Wu Xiang appear here? Did he come here specifically to find me? Leng Shiqi thought to himself. But he suddenly shivered and said hurriedly, "By the way, Delta Origi is still nearby." But Wu Xiang said, "Save it. She has been taken away by Bone Demon." Bone Demon? Bone Demon, the first elder of Blood-Robed Pavilion, a master of Tianyuan Realm, also came here in person? It seemed that Delta Origi was very important to Bone Demon. At this time, the power of a remnant soul poured into his body. It was the remnant soul of the master of Gang Spirit Realm, which was a great supplement for Leng Shiqi. He felt comfortable in his body, and then asked with a little doubt, "Master, do you know who that person was?" "Humph, he has been avoiding using the unique skills of the sect, but he's still exposed that his cultivation method is 1,000 illusory sword tactics." 1,000 illusory sword tactics. He was from 1,000 illusory sword sect. Is he the mastermind behind the scenes mentioned by Oziu? Leng Shiqi thought and couldn't help glancing at Wu Xiang. However, Wu Xiang did not pay attention to him. Following that, Wu Xiang brought Leng Shiqi and left the southern god peak. Along the way, he did not mention a single word about Oziu, which made Leng Shiqi feel a little strange. He had prepared some excuses, but now he didn't need to use them at all. Suddenly remembered what had happened in the past. When he first arrived at the Donglin County branch, he had entered the tomb of Boiwenhu. However, when he returned to the branch, the head of the Grand Pavilion, Ghost Ju, did not ask him where he had gone. Later, in the Demon Mountain Demon Use, in Demonic Demons, Feng Shamo knew that he had gone to the Demon Miasma Mountain Range. However, there was a beast tide in the Demon Miasma Mountain Range, followed by the Great Demon's Tribulation, and the Imperial Beast Abode and Blood Beast sect fighting there. The Blood Robe Pavilion definitely had this information, but Feng Shamo had never asked him about the Demon Miasma Mountain Range. After he entered the illusory spirit mystic realm as Zhuqiu, everyone knew that Zhuqiu had obtained the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation method inheritance. But whether it was Feng Shamo or Wu Xiang, or even the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion, they had never mentioned the cultivation method, including his arrival at South Divine Peak. Although he had accepted the mission to assassinate Oziu, the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion knew that both of them had the Divine Illusion Palace's cultivation method. Now that he had disappeared for 3 months, not only did his cultivation soar to the 3rd level of the Spirit Vein realm, but he could also trigger the 7-colored light here. How could Wu Xiang not see it? Shouldn't Wu Xiang ask him if he had obtained Oziu's cultivation method? Did he have some kind of opportunity? Why was it completely different from the Thousand Illusion Sword sect that Oziu was in? After he connected all of this together, he realized one thing. The Blood Robe Pavilion seemed to have given him a lot of freedom, as if they were letting him live. He could not ask where he went. He could also not ask what he had obtained. Even Wu Xiang had never given him any powerful spiritual skills or spiritual weapons. This was completely a method of letting him live. However, this method of letting him live still allowed him to reach the 3rd level of the Spirit Vein realm at the age of 15. Leng Shiqi did not know why the upper echelons of the Blood Robe Pavilion would treat him like this, but this was a good thing for him. After all, his secrets could not withstand a strict investigation. With Wu Xiang leading the way, they returned to the Blood Robe Pavilion in 3 days. Wu Xiang did not stay idle along the way. He was nagging from beginning to end, saying that Leng Shiqi had made him lose face. This was the first time Leng Shiqi had spent so much time with Wu Xiang. Only then did he know that he was so talkative. As soon as he returned to the Blood Robe Pavilion, Leng Shiqi remembered something. He took out the head of Oziu and said, "Master, Oziu has been killed by me. However, the deadline for the mission has passed. What should I do?" The reward for assassinating Oziu was not low. Just the blood drops alone were worth 300 points. It was a pity to give up just like that. Wu Xiang took the head and casually looked at it. "It's a small matter. I'll help you arrange it." Leng Shiqi saw that Wu Xiang did not doubt the authenticity of the head and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Master. However, I want to give the blood drops for the mission to the Delta Origi. What do you think?" Who knew that before he could finish speaking, Wu Xiang slapped Leng Shiqi on the shoulder. His shoulder vaguely made a crack sound. It was so painful that he grimaced. Fortunately, he was wearing a mask so that he would not make a fool of himself. Wu Xiang's head came over and whispered, "You're amazing. You've already made a move on that little girl. Hee, don't worry. Master will fully support you in this matter. After this matter is done, you must steal a few of Bone Demon's consummate skills for me. As far as I know, Bone Demon has already passed the Ghost Bone Cold Fire Sword to the Delta Origi. You have to find a way to get it." Leng Shiqi, this topic could not continue, so he had to change the topic. "Master, there's still something I don't understand. Last time you said that you went to ask for an opportunity. What is it?" Speaking of this matter, Wu Xiang's attitude suddenly became serious. He said, "This matter might have happened a few years later, but you and the girl Delta Origi broke through the spiritual pulse realm one after another, so it was brought forward. Your cultivation is now at the 3rd level of the spiritual pulse realm, so you're more confident. Leng Shiqi was immediately confused. However, he was keenly aware that this matter was probably related to the Blood Mist Island. Master, what do you need me to do? Wu Xiang said solemnly, you need to win a bet. You must win. Chapter 289. A bet? A bet that they had to win. Leng Shiqi's heart was filled with doubts. Wu Xiang looked deeply at Leng Shiqi through the mask and said, the sect spent hundreds of years of accumulation and countless energy to open up Blood Mist Island and nurture the 4 of you. But it's not for you to be assassins. Blood Cloth Pavilion doesn't lack assassins. It doesn't matter if the 4 of you are there or not. Each and every one of you has important responsibilities and tasks to carry out. You are the key to whether or not Blood Cloth Pavilion can break the shackles in the future. And this bet is the beginning of that matter. Leng Shiqi's eyes flashed. In the past, whether it was Feng Shamo or Guizhu, they had said that the 4 of them were the key to breaking the deadlock of Blood Cloth Pavilion. He guessed what the deadlock of Blood Cloth Pavilion was. Blood Cloth Pavilion was a sword in someone else's hand and had severely limited the development of Blood Cloth Pavilion. It could also be said that many people in Blood Cloth Pavilion were no longer satisfied with just being a sword. Feng Shamo had clearly expressed this attitude in front of Leng Shiqi. But how could they break the deadlock? What were they going to do? What could the 4 of them do with their insignificant cultivation? He didn't know anything. He couldn't even guess. Now, this matter was finally about to surface. Wu Xiang continued, if you want to break the deadlock, the power of Blood Cloth Pavilion alone is too weak. Weak and alone? Leng Shiqi couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he heard this. Blood Cloth Pavilion was one of the top forces of the 7 absolutes in the world and had 5 Sky Origin Realm experts in the sect. With this, they dominated Muchen County and intimidated the entire Thunderblaze Empire. Even in the entire continent, their prestige spread far and wide. How could such a force be called weak and isolated? Have you heard of the 6 Direction Spirit Region? Wu Xiang's question pulled Leng Shiqi back from his thoughts. Of course, he had heard of the 6 Direction Spirit Region. In the world sect ranking, the 4 Saint Spirit Region was ranked below the 3 Great Empires. The 4 Saint Spirit Region was the holy land in the hearts of countless spirit cultivators. It was said that tens of thousands of years ago, this continent was once ruled by a mysterious race, and the human race was completely like livestock. Later on, supreme experts were born from the human race and overthrew the rule of the mysterious race. They also passed down the spirit cultivation lineage, allowing those with talent to cultivate the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It could be said that the 4 supreme experts had not only saved the human race, but also created the path of spirit cultivation and were respectfully called saints. Later on, the 4 saints went into seclusion and left behind their respective inheritances. That was the 4 Saint Spirit Region. In other words, the 4 sacred spirit realms had existed for more than 100,000 years. The amount of resources they possessed was simply unimaginable. However, the 4 sacred spirit realm had always been in a state of seclusion. Under normal circumstances, they would never appear in the outside world. However, once someone from the 4 saint spiritual realms appeared, their skills would shock everyone. And the 6 Direction Spiritual Region that Wu Xiang spoke of was one of the 4 sacred spiritual regions. Leng Shiqi nodded to indicate that he understood, but why would Wu Xiang suddenly mention the 6 Unity Spiritual Region? Wu Xiang said, most of the sects that can be ranked on the world's sect ranking are top-notch powers, but not all of them are like this. For example, the 3 great empires and the 4 sacred spirit realms should be called transcendent powers. This time, our Blood Robe Pavilion has reached an agreement with a transcendent power like the 6 Directions Spiritual Region. And whether or not these agreements can be finalized will depend on the 4 of you. When Leng Shiqi heard this, he could already faintly understand. The Blood Robe Pavilion wanted to break the deadlock, but they were still not strong enough, so they boarded the big ship of the 6 Directions Spiritual Region. Combined with the gambling fight that Wu Xiang mentioned, He guessed that this gambling fight should be a gambling fight between the young disciples of both sides. Lung Shiqi and the other three were seen by the Blood Robe Pavilion as the key to breaking the shackles, but words were not proof. The Sixth Direction spiritual region had to see their true abilities. This gambling fight will be carried out by the four of you, and your opponents will be the middle-aged and young disciples of the Sixth Direction spiritual region. However, according to our requirements, the disciples sent by both sides cannot be older than 16 years old. According to what I know, the Sixth Direction spiritual region sent 2 disciples at the peak of the spirit transformation realm and 2 disciples who have just entered the spirit pulse realm. Their cultivation is the same as yours. However, the Sixth Direction spiritual region's inheritance is too long, and who knows how many ancient cultivation methods and spirit skills are hidden in it. Their combat strength is definitely not ordinary. Lung Shiqi suddenly felt a sense of pressure. In the top forces of the world sect ranking, disciples who broke through to the spirit pulse realm at the age of 25 were known as geniuses. For example, Bai Yi and Ozu were like this. However, in the Sixth Direction spiritual region, there were also 2 disciples who broke through to the spirit pulse realm before the age of 16. If this news were to be released, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. If the Sixth Direction spiritual region was like this, then what about the other 3 spiritual regions? Lung Shiqi felt that he was a frog at the bottom of a well in the past. He had been complacent because he had broken through to the spirit pulse realm early. However, now it seemed that it was nothing to the people of the 4 sacred spirit realms. In addition, the future of the Blood Robe Pavilion depended on this gambling fight, which was equivalent to putting pressure on the shoulders of Lung Shiqi and the others. How could he not feel pressure? However, you don't have to worry too much. Wu Xiang could see that Lung Shiqi was a little stressed. Although the disciples of the Sixth Direction spiritual region are not weak in cultivation and spirit skills, their combat experience is far inferior to yours. That's your biggest advantage. Lung Shiqi and the other 3 had experienced countless battles on Blood Mist Island. In terms of combat experience, they were far superior to the disciples of the Sixth Direction spiritual region who only knew how to cultivate. At this moment, Lung Shiqi felt an inexplicable excitement in his heart. The gambling fight is set for 10 days later. In these few days, Master will guide you well. Wu Xiang patted Lung Shiqi's shoulder. Of course, this time it was very light. However, when Lung Shiqi heard this, the first thought that appeared in his mind was, "So I have a master." After he became Wu Xiang's disciple, the 2 of them had met less than 5 times. Wu Xiang had never taught him anything. Now that Wu Xiang suddenly said that he would guide him, he felt a little flattered. Especially when he thought of the Gang Spirit Realm Master of the Thousand Illusion Sword sect who chased after him. He was actually killed by Wu Xiang with 1 slap, which showed how powerful Wu Xiang was. With such a person guiding him, he believed that his strength could be further improved in a short period of time. In that case, his chances of winning the bet would be even greater. Wu Xiang waved his hand and said, "Well, you know what happened. Go back and have a rest first. Tomorrow morning, go directly to the back mountain to find me." "Yes, I will leave first," Lung Shiqi said and walked to his small courtyard. However, Wu Xiang became sentimental, which was rare for him. Alas, 10 days later, it's up to you. Chapter 290. At dawn the next day, Lung Shiqi came to the back mountain of Wu Xiang Palace. Wu Xiang was already waiting here. Lung Shiqi came early because he was afraid he would be later than Wu Xiang, but he was still late. Wu Xiang said directly, "Next, I will suppress my cultivation to the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. You have to be determined to kill me and use your strongest spirit technique to kill me. If you can force me to move my body or use power beyond the early stage of the spirit pulse realm, you win." Lung Shiqi didn't speak. A heavy wooden spear appeared in his hand. This was the level 4 spirit tool Astral Wood Spirit Spear he bought at a high price. Holding the spear, Lung Shiqi's aura was unparalleled. The tip of his spear thrust forward, and the spear body suddenly drew a huge gray cross in the air as it rushed over. Leng Shiqi didn't test it and used the formation-breaking cross spear right away. However, Formless only extended a finger and lightly flicked it. The cross-shaped light disappeared into nothingness, and the tip of the spear was stopped by Formless' finger. Brave and unparalleled, this spear is not bad. However, you didn't have the resolve to die when you charged into the enemy's formation, nor did you have the resolve to kill me. Therefore, you are still somewhat lacking. Leng Shiqi expected the formation-breaking cross spear to be easily broken, but it was also unexpected. What he didn't expect was that Wu Xiang would be able to break through his attacks so easily. Moreover, his spear was a level 4 spirit weapon, yet it couldn't even hurt Wu Xiang's finger? He could clearly feel that Wu Xiang only used the power of the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. But how did he do it? This wasn't just perfect control of power, it also meant that Wu Xiang's body was terrifyingly strong. Leng Shiqi's body wasn't weak, but it wasn't enough in front of Wu Xiang. Since he was already close, Leng Shiqi put away his spear and punched. A tiger phantom pounced with the power to break rivers and sink oceans. Wu Xiang directly slapped away the tiger's shadow, and the invisible inner strength that entered his body did not have any reaction. Both inside and outside. Not bad, but the overall power is not enough. This was also a problem that Leng Shiqi had discovered. He was also trying to integrate Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist into Tiger's Wave-Stomping Fist. However, he had been studying swordsmanship and illusions in the secret realm and had not had the time to study the fist art. On the contrary, Falling Blossoms and Dazzling Blossoms had already merged together. Leng Shiqi's fist didn't work, so he used another palm. The 6 palms combined into 1.5 feet tall palm shadow with faint flames smashed down with a loud bang. The formless palm slashed downwards, instantly splitting the 6 yang poison fire palm into 2 halves before dissipating in midair. What a vicious palm strike! You have some skills. However, it's strong on the outside and weak on the inside. Once it encounters an extremely ferocious spiritual technique, it will collapse upon contact. Leng Shiqi had yet to discover the weakness of the 6 yang poisonous fire palm that Wu Xiang had mentioned. The follow-up of this palm strike could be strengthened from this aspect. Next, Leng Shiqi used Earth Fiend Demon Claw, Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist, and Blood Sky Finger respectively. All of them were easily broken by Wu Xiang. However, when he used Blood Sky Finger, Wu Xiang muttered, "It's actually at the great perfection stage." He knew that Leng Shiqi had chosen this spiritual technique in the Blood Book Hall. At that time, he had also blocked Leng Shiqi there. Therefore, Wu Xiang also knew that Leng Shiqi had only used this spiritual technique for 3 months. To be able to cultivate a level 4 spiritual technique to the great perfection stage in 3 months, Leng Shiqi's comprehension surprised him. However, what he didn't know was that Leng Shiqi had only used a dozen breaths of time to cultivate Blood Sky Finger to the great perfection stage. Every time Wu Xiang broke a move, he would point out the weakness of the move. Leng Shiqi had fewer and fewer things that he could take out. Soon after, he retreated and his mental energy surged. His left hand lit up with faint starlight and then a giant ice sword nearly 2 feet long whistled out. What surprised Leng Shiqi was that Wu Xiang also formed a spiritual seal with his hand and formed an even more powerful giant flame sword. Leng Shiqi's giant ice sword melted before it even got close. In the end, it turned into a cloud of mist like a moth to a flame. Wu Xiang is also a spiritual caster. This was the first time Leng Shiqi knew of Wu Xiang's ability. He couldn't help but be surprised, because he found that Wu Xiang's spiritual technique, physical strength, and mental power were all very strong. This was very similar to him. It was also at this moment that Leng Shiqi vaguely felt that it wasn't a coincidence that Wu Xiang took him as a disciple. But now was not the time to be distracted. He formed a series of seals and flames surrounded his body to form a giant pillar of fire that shot out. The giant flame sword collided with the pillar of fire and exploded. Waves of fire spread out and scorched the surrounding ground. When the waves of fire dissipated, Leng Shiqi was wearing a set of pitch-black demon armor. Wu Xiang carefully looked at Leng Shiqi's demonic beast blood pattern armor. He felt traces of killing intent from Lung Shiqi. He nodded and said, "Interesting. You finally have the resolve to kill me." The black jade sword was unsheathed. The sharp blade of the level 5 spirit artifact spat out a glaring sword light. Lung Shiqi's spirit and mental power quickly circulated. His aura climbed higher and higher. When his aura reached its peak, Lung Shiqi suddenly disappeared. He suddenly disappeared in front of Wu Xiang's eyes. At this moment, countless beautiful flower petals fell from the sky. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. But there was a huge killing intent hidden in these flower petals. Suddenly, the flower petals spun and shot towards Wu Xiang. It turned out that each flower petal was a sword energy. Wu Xiang murmured, "He actually pulled me into an illusion in an instant. Illusionary and real, real and fake. This move is not bad." At this moment, to Wu Xiang's surprise, 36 phantoms appeared out of thin air and surrounded him. Each phantom was a sword light that intersected with the sword energy in the air. From afar, it formed the illusion of a giant flower. In an instant, the sword light raged and the sword energy rampaged. Chaotic flowers, dazzling eyes. Combining movement, sword energy, and illusion into one. This was the true chaotic flower's dazzling eyes. Wu Xiang finally became cautious. He formed a sword with his finger and a sharp sword, intense sword into the sky. Suddenly, countless invisible sword energy burst out and instantly destroyed all the phantoms and flower petals. But he still looked around vigilantly. He did not relax at all because he did not find Lung Shiqi's real body. The next moment, a long river of sword light broke out from the ground and stabbed at Wu Xiang's chassis. "Insidious!" Wu Xiang shouted in a low voice and pressed down with his palm. An invisible force pressed down, preventing Lung Shiqi's sword from moving forward. But at this moment, Lung Shiqi changed his sword for a sword. A cold sword light slashed out as if it was splitting the sky. Wu Xiang felt a chill in his crotch and his whole body trembled. Chapter 291. Inside Wu Xiang Palace, Lung Shiqi sat weakly on a chair while Wu Xiang paced back and forth with lingering fear. Not long ago, he almost lost his little brother. Lung Shiqi's flash in the pan took more than 80% of his strength, but it also allowed Wu Xiang to use strength that exceeded the early stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. In other words, Lung Shiqi won. However, ever since they came back, Wu Xiang had been pacing back and forth. Lung Shiqi was a little dizzy, but he couldn't say anything. After a while, Wu Xiang finally stopped and said to Lung Shiqi, "Master has nothing to teach you. As long as you can make up for the shortcomings I mentioned, you can at least beat one person." Lung Shiqi heard what he said. It seemed that this bet wasn't one-on-one, so he asked, "Master, what are the rules of the bet?" Wu Xiang replied, "It's an arena battle. Whoever stands on the arena in the end will be the winner." If it was an arena battle, then there might be a situation of 1 versus 2, or even 1 versus 3. However, before Lung Shiqi could think about it, a gray-clothed disciple appeared outside the door. "Master Wu Xiang, Delta Origi wants to see Lung Shiqi." "Delta Origi is here?" Lung Shiqi's heart skipped a beat. Wu Xiang immediately pulled Lung Shiqi and said, TSK, you're quite capable. Don't forget what Master said. Get a few spirit techniques." Lung Shiqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he guessed that Delta Origi was here for the spirit techniques. After a while, Lung Shiqi brought Delta Origi back to his small courtyard. Delta Origi went straight to the point and said, "The 300 drops of blood have been given to me. I'm here to fulfill my promise." Lung Shiqi said politely, "If I hadn't accepted the mission to assassinate Ozu, causing a delay of 3 months, I'm afraid you would have already been promoted to a blood-clothed assassin. But if it weren't for this trip, I wouldn't have seen the heavenly phenomenon of the Southern Divine Peak, and my cultivation wouldn't have advanced so quickly. You won't realize that there is such a big gap between us." At this point, Delta Origi's tone had a complicated meaning. Lung Shiqi knew that Delta Origi's competitive nature was showing again. In this trip to the Southern Divine Peak with Delta Origi, The strength shown by Delta Origi was far inferior to that of Lung Shiqi, whether it was against Ozu or the pursuit of Gang Spirit Realm. Although Delta Origi was already very strong among the same level, she knew very well that the gap between them and Lung Shiqi was huge. Unknowingly, Lung Shiqi had left her in the dust. This made her very uncomfortable. This matter had instead become the motivation for Delta Origi to cultivate even harder. Now, she was no longer curious about the colorful world outside. She just wanted to improve her strength as soon as possible. Delta Origi continued, "Before doing the mission, I promised to give you spiritual skills. But we've only done one mission, and I've already thought of a way to get the remaining blood drops, so I can only give you a third-level spiritual skill as a reward." Lung Shiqi could accept it completely. He even felt that he had made a small profit. Delta Origi took out a piece of paper with the names of 4 spiritual skills written on it. "Pick one." Lung Shiqi looked at it and asked, "Why don't you just give me the secret manual of the spiritual skill?" If that was the case, he could directly use his infinite skill points to learn it. That would be a huge profit. Although Delta Origi was wearing a mask, Lung Shiqi could feel that she was rolling her eyes at him. "It's too troublesome to write them one by one. Besides, do you think I don't know that you have a photographic memory? You still want to take advantage of me." Lung Shiqi smiled embarrassedly. Fortunately, with the mask, he didn't make a fool of himself. Then, he carefully looked at the contents of the paper. The 4 spiritual skills on it were Triple Origin Cyan Spirit Sword, Impermanent Steps, Shifting Bone Technique, and Red Poison Curse. Lung Shiqi directly eliminated the first 2. He didn't need the third-level blade and movement techniques at the moment, so he could only choose between the remaining 2. The Shifting Bone Technique was a spiritual skill that could slightly change one's body shape. Lung Shiqi had a human skin mask and a voice-changing technique. If combined with the Shifting Bone Technique, he could change into many different identities. It was a practical spiritual skill that could conceal one's identity. The Red Poison Curse was a spiritual skill that was similar to a curse. The reason why Lung Shiqi wanted this spiritual skill was because his centipede curse could no longer keep up with his cultivation. Before the 4th realm of heaven, the centipede curse was still very useful. However, for spirit cultivators in the spirit pulse realm, the centipede curse was easily suppressed. For example, the black-veiled woman last time, she only used a few breaths of time to suppress the centipede curse. He believed that she would be able to expel the centipede curse from her body in no time. Therefore, Lung Shiqi also wanted a spiritual skill that could control others. But after pondering for a while, he finally chose the Shifting Bone Technique. He wanted the Red Poison Curse, but he currently had the ability to control illusions, so he didn't need it. Moreover, he could use his blood droplets to exchange for this kind of spiritual technique. However, the Shifting Bone Technique was different. He often went out, so it was very important to conceal his identity. Moreover, this spiritual skill was probably related to the Bone Demon, so it probably couldn't be exchanged. Thus, Lung Shiqi said, "I want the Shifting Bone Technique." Delta Origi said, "I knew you would choose this. I've already prepared it for you." As she spoke, she took out a secret manual. "This spiritual skill can't be taught to outsiders, but Master said that you performed well in the Southern God Peak, so he made an exception." Lung Shiqi didn't understand what the Bone Demon meant by performed well. However, since it was personally instructed by the Bone Demon, he felt even more at ease. "I just started cultivating the Shifting Bone Technique, so I don't have any insights to give you. Of course, I don't think you need it. By the way, although I believe you won't do this, I still have to say that you can't spread it." "Of course," Lung Shiqi said seriously. Then he changed the topic. "You should know about the bet." Speaking of this, Delta Origi's body tensed up. She said seriously, "I know. This matter is very important. We can only win, not lose." Lung Shiqi said, "You don't have to put too much pressure on yourself. The disciples of the Lioha spiritual region have their advantages, but we also have advantages that they don't have. I understand what you're saying. This is also the method I mentioned before to obtain large amounts of blood drops. What do these two have to do with each other? Lung Shichi couldn't help but be puzzled. Delta Origi said, of course it's related. If we win the bet, do you think we'll win for nothing? When the time comes, I'll ask the sect for blood drops. They'll definitely agree. This is indeed a method. Lung Shichi nodded. He also wondered if he should ask for something if he won. Chapter 292. 10 days later, at the Bloodkill Hall. All the big shots of the Blood Robe Pavilion had arrived. The two pavilion elders, the pavilion leader, Hateful Blade, the vice pavilion leader, Ink Frost Ghost, and the disciplinary Grand Elder, Bone Devil, were all present. Other than them, there were Formless, Lung Shichi, Delta Origi, Yushu, and Hengming. After so many days, Lung Shichi finally got to see Yushu and Hengming. Yushu was still the same black-robed assassin. He was currently wearing a mask that only revealed his eyes and winking at Lung Shichi. As for Hengming, he still had that unapproachable expression on his face. It seems like they haven't changed much, Lung Shichi thought to himself. He had thought that Yushu would change after becoming the pavilion master's personal disciple. He thought that Yushu would look down on him, the disciple of the underworld Bloodkill Pavilion. Then, Yushu would use his powerful cultivation to slap him in the face. But that was not the case at all. The four of them had stood out from tens of thousands of people. If they didn't even have that little bit of temperament, it would be a waste. Not long after, 5 people walked into the Bloodkill Hall. The one at the front was an old man with an elegant temperament. He didn't have the slightest bit of aura, but every step he took felt like he was stepping on the pulse of heaven and earth. It was as if he had become one with heaven and earth. Behind the old man were 4 youths, 3 boys and 1 girl. They all looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. The 4 of them looked left and right curiously, as if they rarely went out of the house. However, the cultivation bases of these 4 youths were extremely terrifying. 2 were at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, and 2 were at the spirit vein realm. They were the geniuses of the 6 directions spiritual zone, the opponents of Lung Shichi and the others. After these people entered the Bloodkill Hall, Hateful Blade and the others stood up to welcome them. Only the 2 elders remained seated. Hateful Blade said, "Elder Shao, please excuse me for not going out to meet you." Elder Shao said bluntly, "We don't have much time. Let's begin." Hateful Blade didn't say anything. He used his palm as a blade and chopped down. With his palm as the center, ripples appeared in the space. Those ripples spread out, covering the entire Bloodkill Hall. Lung Shichi was shocked to find that the surrounding scenery had suddenly changed into a grassland. He was stunned at first. Then, he rubbed the ground with his feet and realized that the grass and soil on the ground were all real. Huge waves of emotions surged in his heart. Changing space with a flip of his hand, what kind of heaven-defying ability was this? At this time, Elder Shao also looked deeply at Hateful Blade, and a trace of fear flashed through his eyes. Those big shots didn't have any special reaction, but the 4 young men and women couldn't help but exclaim. Delta Origi and the others were also shocked, but they did not show it. Elder Shao coughed lightly, and the 4 youths immediately restrained their expressions and calmed down. Hateful Blade said, "Let's do it here. You should be clear about the rules. Let the battle begin." As soon as Hateful Blade finished speaking, the atmosphere instantly became heavy. Yushu hugged a long blade and walked forward a few steps. He laughed and said, "My name is Yushu, Yushu from Yushu. Who wants to exchange a few blows with me?" His tone was full of frivolity, as if he didn't care about the other party at all. The 4 disciples of the Lioha spiritual zone's expressions changed. Some of them even showed a trace of anger. Elder Shao frowned slightly at first, but he immediately calmed down and didn't say anything. A young man in luxurious clothes walked up. His eyes were filled with anger as he said, "Arrogant. I, Shao Fu, will let you know what it means to say that there is always someone better than you." This person was one of the spirit transformation disciples of the Lioha spiritual zone, Shao Fu. The bracelet on his right wrist flashed slightly, and a gorgeous spirit blade appeared in his hand. Lung Shichi's eyes narrowed. He had clearly seen that Xiao Fu was using a mustard seed bracelet. A mustard seed bracelet was also a storage spirit tool, but its storage space was far greater than a mustard seed bag, and it was better at hiding. However, the value of a mustard seed bracelet was far greater than a mustard seed bag. Xiao Fu was only at the spirit transformation realm, but he could wear a mustard seed bracelet. From this, it could be seen that the Liuhe spiritual zone's foundation was indeed very rich. Yushu's attention was completely focused on Xiao Fu's spirit blade. The handle and blade of the blade were inlaid with light blue gems, and it looked very gorgeous. Yushu said, "You also use a blade." Sure, you can show me some moves." Xiao Fu seemed to be even angrier. He didn't answer and directly attacked with his blade in anger. However, his blade aura was very ethereal. The light blue gems on the blade flickered endlessly, and then a blade light like a blue moon spilled out. This blade was stunning. Lung Shiqi couldn't help but secretly nod. Although Xiao Fu's temperament wasn't very good, his strength was truly strong. This blade was actually somewhat similar to the waning moon rapid light / he had first comprehended. However, the difference was that his waning moon rapid light / pursued extreme sharpness, while Xiao Fu's blade pursued ethereal intent. This kind of blade aura was inevitably a bit flashy. The blue moon fell, but Yushu didn't panic at all. He unsheathed his spirit blade and slashed out with a blade aura. However, his blade aura was strange and ruthless. It was like a storm that directly shattered Xiao Fu's blue moon. Xiao Fu's expression changed slightly. His blade aura immediately changed, becoming dignified and majestic. The two completely opposite blade auras continued to clash, and the spectators were a bit dazzled. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that overall, Xiao Fu had the upper hand. Delta Origi asked Lung Shiqi, "Who do you think will win?" Lung Shiqi said, "Both of them are at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, but Xiao Fu's cultivation method is clearly better than Yushu's. His spirit force is 30% stronger than Yushu's. In addition, Xiao Fu's spirit technique and spirit blade are stronger than Yushu's. If this continues, Yushu will undoubtedly lose." "Then what do you mean?" "Yushu will win." Delta Origi didn't understand. "You were the one who said Yushu was inferior to Xiao Fu, and now you're the one who said Yushu will win?" Lung Shiqi whispered, "I know Yushu better than you do. Just watch." In the battle, Xiao Fu continued to suppress Yushu. At this moment, Yushu was clearly at a disadvantage and even showed signs of defeat. Xiao Fu's blade emitted a faint blue light. He found a flaw in Yushu's defense and slashed down. Puchi. Xiao Fu's blade cut deeply into Yushu's shoulder. He sneered, "Aren't you arrogant? Try being arrogant again." Seeing this, the other three disciples of the Six Unity spiritual realm all revealed expressions of relief. However, Yushu also smiled strangely. In the next moment, a saber had appeared in his left hand at some unknown time. Immediately after, a blade aura as fast as light slashed toward Xiao Fu's throat. Chapter 293. Lung Shiqi had personally experienced Yushu's trick of exchanging injury for death. Xiao Fu's saber was stuck in Yushu's flesh, and he thought that he had won, so he lowered his guard a lot. Unfortunately, the more dangerous it was. Yushu's sudden attack was too fast for Xiao Fu to react. Just as Yushu's blade was about to behead Xiao Fu's figure suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he had appeared beside Elder Xiao. Elder Xiao said in a low voice, "Xiao Fu has lost this round." Xiao Fu was still in a state of shock. If Elder Xiao hadn't stepped in to save him, he would have been dead by now. However, he didn't understand. He was stronger than Yushu in every aspect, so how did he lose? If this wasn't a bet, but a fight to the death, he would already be dead. However, he still wasn't convinced. He still had a few powerful spirit techniques that he hadn't used, and he also had trump cards. These were all his methods to win. Elder Xiao's voice appeared in Xiao Fu's mind. "You're the one who's really arrogant. Now do you understand how terrifying the Blood Garment Pavilion disciples are?" Their cultivation methods, spirit techniques, and spirit artifacts may not be as good as yours, but they've all climbed out of a pool of blood. Their battle experience and ability to choose between life and death far exceed yours. At the same time, his voice also reached the ears of the other three people, and their expressions all became serious. Although Yushu had won, Xiaofu's attack was very deep and almost cut off his right arm. At this moment, he used his spirit energy to seal the wound, but he didn't leave. He raised his head and said, "Who else?" Lung Shichi couldn't help but admire Yushu when he heard that. Yushu's taunt skill was really maxed out. As for the other three Lioha spiritual region disciples, their serious expressions were instantly replaced by anger. They had never been looked down upon like this before. When Elder Xiao saw this, he secretly sighed in his heart. The temperament of these few disciples was still a little lacking. Wu Xiong quietly stood on his tiptoes at the side. He seemed to be in a good mood. Another youth with a jade crown on his head from the Six Directions spiritual region walked over and said, "Six Directions spiritual region, Wan Rui. You're already heavily injured. You're no match for me. Admit defeat." Yushu grinned and said, "Even so, I can drag you down with me. Do you believe me?" Wan Rui appeared to be calmer than Xiaofu, but he was also quite arrogant. He shook his head and said, "Stubborn. I only need one move to defeat you." He wasn't careless either. His hands became as translucent as jade, and with a slap of his palms, the force of 1,000 caddies came crashing down. Wan Rui actually wanted to use force to suppress others. Lung Shichi also felt that Wan Rui's choice was correct. Yushu was already heavily injured, and there was no way he could defend himself. At this moment, Yushu closed his eyes. In less than an instant he opened them again. Both of his eyes had turned pitch black, without the slightest bit of white in them. Black gas appeared on the blade in Yushu's left hand. He slashed out without any blade energy. Wan Rui thought that Yushu had given up on resisting, but this seemingly ordinary slash strangely passed through Wan Rui's arms and went straight for his head. Wan Rui was shocked. His hands released bursts of jade-colored spirit light. His hands suddenly doubled in size and grabbed Yushu's blade. His hands were filled with great power, and he was actually able to squeeze Yushu's blade until it cracked. However, Wan Rui couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Yushu wasn't lying. He really could drag him down with him. At the same time, Wan Rui's other hand slammed down and a glaring jade light surged. At this moment, Yushu had used up all his strength and no longer had the ability to resist. He could only quickly shout, "I admit defeat." Wan Rui's movements paused, but Yushu laughed sinisterly. "However, you used 2 moves, huh?" Wan Rui's face was as ugly as if he had eaten a fly. He did say that he could defeat Yushu in 1 move, but in the end he still used 2 moves. The people watching were either the higher-ups of both sides or the genius disciples. This made him feel a little embarrassed. Yushu walked back to Lung Shichi's side and secretly gave himself a thumbs up. Elder Mu flicked his finger and a ray of green light entered Yushu's right shoulder. The originally terrible wound quickly healed in a few breaths of time. Yushu immediately touched his wound in amazement. Then he immediately became lively again. He actually gave Wan Rui a thumbs up and then gestured down a few times. Wan Rui's eyes burned with anger when he saw this. He squeezed out a sentence through gritted teeth. The Blood Cloak Pavilion is one of the 7 absolutes, but its disciples are acting like this. What an eye-opener. However, the people of the Blood Cloak Pavilion were unmoved. The only one who moved was Xiongming. He walked forward without saying anything. A pair of black fist blades appeared on his arms and killing intent rose in his eyes. Next was the battle between Xiongming and Wan Rui. Wan Rui didn't dare to underestimate any of the Blood Cloak Pavilion disciples now. He sized up Xiongming. However, he suddenly realized that Xiongming was just standing in front of him, but he had a feeling that he was going to ignore Xiongming. This very strange feeling made him feel a little uncomfortable. He said, "What is your name, sir?" Xiongming didn't answer his question. His body flashed, and his fist blades, which carried traces of demonic qi, arrived in front of Wan Rui. When Wan Rui saw Xiong Ming attack without even greeting him, he thought to himself, the people of the Blood Cloak Pavilion are all crazy. However, he didn't slow down. His hands shone with layers of jade light, and he suddenly slapped out with a magnificent aura. With a ding, Xiong Ming's fist blades clashed with Wan Rui's jade-like hands, producing a clanging sound. Xiong Ming's body moved again. He constantly moved around Wan Rui, constantly looking for an opening. Wan Rui, on the other hand, used defense as offense. He relied on the strength of his jade-like hands to deal with all kinds of changes. Xiong Ming was very fast, but Wan Rui was strong enough to defeat all of them. Every time they clashed, Wan Rui had a slight advantage. If this continued, Xiong Ming would probably be exhausted and defeated. However, Leng Shiqi, Delta Origi, and Yu Shu weren't in a hurry. They all knew that among the four of them, Xiong Ming was the one who was best at hiding his strength. He probably had some kind of backup plan. After another attack, Xiong Ming was forced to retreat. This had happened several times already, and Wan Rui was getting a little impatient. At that moment, an almost undetectable wisp of blood hidden in the demonic chi silently shot towards Wan Rui. He only just noticed it when it was about to touch him. Leng Shiqi was slightly surprised to see that wisp of blood. It was the Line Blood Heavenly Finger. Xiong Ming had also cultivated the Line Blood Heavenly Finger, and judging from the speed of the wisp of blood, he had already mastered the technique. This sudden wisp of blood caught Wan Rui off guard. He reached out with one hand, wanting to crush the wisp of blood. However, the most powerful thing about the Line Blood Heavenly Finger was its penetrative power. The wisp of blood pierced through his jade-like hands, but his jade-like hands had already dimmed. Wan Rui secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that a cloud of demonic chi appeared behind him, and a figure emerged from it. It was Xiong Ming. Another Xiong Ming. Chapter 294. Another Meng Ming had appeared behind Wan Rui, but Wan Rui didn't notice it at all. Leng Shiqi was a little stunned as well because he couldn't tell which one was the real body of the infernal underworld. His eyes under the mask turned white, and he was able to tell that the Meng Ming behind Wan Rui was the real one. Wu Xiang muttered, Ink Frost Ghostly Being even taught the underworld ghost clone, Yushu learned the Death Intent Strike, and Delta Origi learned the Ghost Bone Ice Fire Sword. TSK, it seems like I'm the only one who didn't teach Leng Shiqi anything. His voice wasn't loud, but he was close to Leng Shiqi, so Leng Shiqi heard what he said. Leng Shiqi was speechless. The scene of the battle naturally fell into the eyes of the people from the 6 Unity spiritual region. They could only watch, but they could not say anything. Once they reminded Wan Rui, it would mean that they had lost. Wan Rui looked at the Blood Sky Finger that had blocked a sliver of the Blood Sky Finger, and then saw the infernal underworld stabbing towards him. Finally, he stopped defending. He took a step forward, and a powerful aura rushed toward him, blowing his hair. Yushu yelled, Half-Step Spirit Pulse Realm. That's right, the aura Wan Rui was displaying was the aura of someone who had transformed their sea of chi into a spiritual sea. He only needed to open one more spirit pulse to reach the spirit pulse realm. So Wan Rui had been hiding something. Wan Rui clapped his hands, and a violent wave of palm energy rushed out, shattering the Meng Ming in front of him into a cloud of black mist. Wan Rui paused for a moment, and then he felt a chill behind him. He turned around, and the other Meng Ming behind him was surrounded by demonic chi, which condensed into 8 spider-like demonic spikes that stabbed at his vital points. Wan Rui yelled, and his body lit up with a faint jade glow, but he was too late. The demonic chi of the Meng Ming easily tore through his jade glow, and just as it was about to kill him, Wan Rui took out a jade stone from his mustard seed bracelet. At this moment, Elder Shao said, We admit defeat. Elder, I haven't lost yet. Wan Rui held the jade stone in his hand and said unwillingly. Enough, come here. Wan Rui didn't dare to disobey Elder Shao's words, so he could only leave the stage. This also meant that he had lost. But he felt that he hadn't lost. Haven't you noticed that Hengming has been trying to get you used to his attack rhythm? He did it on purpose. From the beginning to the end, All of your reactions were under the control of others, but you were completely unaware of it. I am very disappointed. Elder Xiao's words entered his mind, causing his entire body to tremble. In his battle with Meng Ming, he had indeed thought that Meng Ming was the kind of person who was skilled in movement techniques and flexible in his attacks. Indeed, he had slowly figured out Heng Ming's tactics. Initially, he thought that he would be able to win if he played it safe. However, Tong Ming's blood heavenly fingers suddenly changed. For Wan Ruei, the power of this move was not very strong, so he blocked it. But what he never expected was that the blood heavenly finger was only a means to attract his attention. It was all for the sake of unleashing the real killer move without anyone noticing, that strange shadow. Thinking of this, Wan Rui looked at Heng Ming with a trace of shock. His direct combat strength was much higher than Heng Ming's, and he also had trump cards that he hadn't used, but he had still lost. He had lost to Heng Ming's battle rhythm. At this moment, Heng Ming's face was deathly pale, and his body was slightly swaying. However, a trace of fear appeared in Wan Rui's heart. The Blood Robe Pavilion had won 2 battles in a row, which made the people of the Six Directions spiritual region feel a little incredulous. Before coming, Xiao Fu and Wan Rui had come with the mentality that they would definitely win. Although the Six Directions spiritual region and the Blood Robe Pavilion were both on the world sect ranking, they had never really taken the disciples of the Blood Robe Pavilion seriously. In fact, they even wanted to have fun on this trip. However, now that Xiao Fu and Wan Rui had been defeated in a row, it was equivalent to a slap in the face. Fortunately, this was an arena battle, not a one-on-one battle. As long as the final victor was one of their people, the Six Directions spiritual region would still win. Therefore, the most important thing was still to see the battle between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators. After winning, Heng Ming didn't continue to stay like Yushu. Instead, he directly walked back. He knew that the next battle would be between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators, so there was no need for him to continue fighting. "I'll go first." At this moment, Delta Origi's voice sounded. Then, she lightly stepped forward and stood upright. The remaining 2 people from the Six Directions spiritual region were a man and a woman. They discussed in low voices for a moment, and the young girl also went up to fight. This young girl didn't use any spiritual power, but she gave off a lively feeling just by standing there. She said in a crisp voice, "Yun Meng Si." Delta Origi. Delta Origi? What a strange name. Yun Meng Si tilted her head slightly and muttered. Delta Origi couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with her. All the bones in her body creaked, and her hair turned silver white. Her aura then skyrocketed. Then she spun the bone sword in her hand and ignited layers of ghost fire. Netherworld chi spread out in all directions. Delta Origi didn't probe at all. She actually used such a powerful spiritual technique right from the start. Yun Meng Si's beautiful face changed slightly, but she didn't panic. Her hands flew like flowers, forming one spiritual seal after another. It was full of beauty. She was actually a spiritual caster of the Spirit Pulse realm. Spiritual casters would undergo a qualitative change after entering the 4 realms of the Sky Realm. If they were compared to other cultivators of the same cultivation, their fighting strength would definitely be extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, dozens of wind blades suddenly appeared behind Yun Meng Si. On each wind blade, there was a strange mark that faintly flashed. The wind blades trembled slightly and emitted a wung-wung sound. Then she lightly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and floated backwards. At the same time, the dozens of wind blades whistled out. The wind blades sliced through the air and emitted ear-piercing sounds. However, Delta Origi turned a deaf ear to them. The bone sword in her hand waved out sword shadows, shattering the wind blades one after another. Then, the ghost fire on her bone sword flourished. A faint death chi rose up and pervaded the surrounding area. She waved her arm and slashed out a glaring ghost fire sword beam. Yun Meng Si had been locking her fingers together. Around her, 3 differently colored spheres of light emerged, each releasing a different sense of power. One was as sharp as gold, one was as hot as fire, and one was as heavy as a mountain. Finally, they formed the gold, fire, and mountain imprints respectively. The mountain imprint lit up first. Immediately, a faint yellow light spread out and suppressed the death chi. Then, the gold imprint flickered incessantly. Layers of gold light shields appeared in front of Yunmeng-si, blocking Delta Origi's sword beam. Finally, the fire imprint trembled and fire arrows shot out one after another. However, Delta Origi didn't dodge. The ghost fire and the flame collided and easily destroyed all the fire arrows. While Yunmeng-si was stunned, Delta Origi had already approached her. In front of my ghost bone-cold fire sword, ordinary flames don't deserve to exist. Delta Origi stabbed out. It seemed like only one stab, but in fact, she had stabbed out dozens of times in an instant. So many sword shadows overlapped, gathering in unimaginable power. Yunmeng-si's red lips slightly opened and said a strange word, "Nah." Then, the three imprints around her began to twist rhythmically. Gradually, the three imprints merged into one. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy rippled out. A golden spear as heavy as Mount Tai and burning with raging flames appeared out of nowhere. Yunmeng-si actually held the spear in her hand and swept out. The surrounding 200 to 300 feet was instantly covered by a dense golden light. Waves of violent waves swept over everyone. Yushu and the other spirit transformation realm disciples turned pale and retreated. Elder Xiao and Wu Xiang both took action to protect their disciples. Leng Shiqi's eyes narrowed. Yunmeng-si's strength was indeed a little beyond his expectations. This was the true combat strength that the disciples of the Six Directions spiritual zone should have. However, he wasn't worried about Delta Origi at all. Because when the light dissipated, Delta Origi's figure was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 295. When all the light dissipated, Delta Origi's figure strangely disappeared. Yunmeng-si's heart tightened. Shortly after, the wisp's sword light suddenly appeared above her head, forming a sword net that descended upon her. Yunmeng-si's expression finally changed. However, an exquisite bell appeared on her wrist. She shook it lightly, and a crisp sound rang out. Layers of sound waves visible to the naked eye surged out, forming a semicircular spiritual shield. The sword net fell, and the ghost fire swords continuously cut at the spiritual shield, producing an extremely ear-piercing sound. The sound wave spiritual shield kept on twisting, but it still managed to forcibly take on the sword net. Yushu immediately shouted, "Cheating, she's cheating. There's something strange about this bell." If Yushu could see it, so could the others. When Yunmeng-si took out the bell, Leng Shiqi noticed that there was a spiritual technique sealed within the bell. In other words, the sound shield that protected Yunmeng-si just now wasn't her spiritual technique, but an ability that came with the bell. However, this couldn't be considered cheating. It could only be said that her spiritual tool was exquisite enough. At this moment, Delta Origi's figure strangely appeared beside Yunmeng-si. Just as she was about to launch a sneak attack, Yunmeng-si smiled proudly. Leng Shiqi instantly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, a circular spiritual formation instantly appeared under Yunmeng-si's feet, and countless needle-like streams of water appeared. The streams of water swept out like a storm, as if they wanted to swallow Delta Origi whole. Water countered fire. Yunmeng-si knew that Delta Origi's ghost bone-chilling fire was incomparably powerful, so she used the endless streams of water to break it. Facing so many streams of water, even Delta Origi couldn't dodge. Since she couldn't dodge, then she wouldn't dodge. A bloodline quietly appeared on Delta Origi's blade. That was the spiritual technique that came with the Seven Fiends' art, Carnage Blood. As soon as the bloodline appeared, the ghost fire was instantly dyed into blood flames. Blood flames appeared in the world, and blood fiendish energy spread out. Delta Origi stabbed out with her sword, and in a split second, blood energy soared into the sky, almost wiping out all the water currents. However, there was still a lapse in concentration, and several streams of water still pierced her body. Fortunately, the impact was not great. Up until now, both Delta Origi and Yunmeng-si had used their trump cards one after another, but neither side could do anything to the other. If they continued to fight like this, they would only be able to compete in terms of spiritual power. Perhaps, Yunmeng-si's cultivation method was slightly better than Delta Origi's, but Delta Origi's cultivation was indeed at the peak of the first level of Spirit Pulse realm. Therefore, their powers were almost the same. How long would that take? Moreover, there was still a battle coming up. If they could preserve some of their spiritual energy, they might be able to exhaust a portion of their opponent's spiritual energy. At this moment, both of them had the same thought, and that was to decide the outcome of the battle with one move. Delta Origi's originally thin body suddenly became even more delicate, but her aura had already reached the second level of the Spirit Pulse realm. Blood flames rose around her body as her fighting spirit soared higher and higher. A mystical imprint appeared on Yunmeng-si's forehead, and boundless spiritual power surged continuously. She quickly formed hand seals, and every time she formed a spiritual seal, a few streams of light would gather above her head. Gradually, the shadow of a small palace appeared there. Both of them were accumulating power and waiting to attack. The first to move was still Delta Origi. Her bone sword trembled and let out a hiss. The dense blood fiendish energy and blood flames fused together, and suddenly, a blood-colored sword light slashed out like a waterfall. Yunmeng-si pushed her hands forward, and the shadow of the palace in midair let out a pleasant sound. That sound contained an invisible power, and instantly dispersed a portion of the blood-fiendish energy. Then, the shadow of the palace bloomed with a boundless light, and a sound that didn't seem to belong to the mortal world came out. That sound seemed to come from the ancient times, and it shook the heavens and earth, suppressing everything. Delta Origi's blood-colored waterfall was actually shaken to the point that it almost dissipated from the illusory sound of the blade. Then, Delta Origi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. She wasn't injured, but she spat it out on her own accord. That was her blood essence. The blood all fell onto the bone sword, and suddenly, a ferocious blood aura rose into the air. The blood-colored waterfall expanded by a large amount, and tore the shadow of the palace apart. The blood-colored waterfall didn't lose its momentum, and it slashed towards Yunmeng-si. However, an arm suddenly appeared from the shadow of the palace. It waved lightly, and the huge blood-colored waterfall instantly shattered like a bubble. Delta Origi was hit by the blood essence backlash, and she spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Her body returned to its original state, but she swayed and almost fainted. At this time, a figure held her shoulder, and she didn't fall. While Yu Shu shouted angrily, "Do you still want your face?" That arm clearly didn't belong to her. What Yu Shu said could be seen by everyone present. The power emitted by that arm had far surpassed the power of a spiritual pulse realm cultivator, and even the power of a spiritual aperture realm cultivator. That definitely wasn't Yunmeng-si's own power. If Yunmeng-si really had such power, the Blood Robe Pavilion would have just admitted defeat. What was the point of fighting? Before this, Yunmeng-si had used that bell, which was more or less acceptable. But this time, it was true that he had cheated. The 5 Sky Origin Realm cultivators of the Blood Robe Pavilion, including Wu Xiang, all took a step forward. They didn't say anything, but their meaning was obvious. Elder Shao also sighed helplessly. Yunmeng-si is a genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. It's normal for her to have some tricks up her sleeve to protect her. It's just that I didn't think that she would be forced out in the middle of the battle. Why don't we call it a draw? A draw? If that arm hadn't appeared, Delta Origi would have already won. Why would they call it a draw? The people of the Blood Robe Pavilion were naturally unwilling. Pavilion Master Hateful Blade said, "You and I are both in the Sky Origin realm. Can't you see the direction of the battle?" Delta Origi won. Elder Shao shook his head and said, "That might not be the case. Yunmeng-si is also proficient in several spiritual formations, which can be activated in an instant. Even if there were no external objects to stop her, she wouldn't have lost. Therefore, a draw is the best result." Elder Xiao wants to fight on paper? Hateful Blade's words had a hint of sarcasm. Elder Xiao was actually feeling very bitter. They were indeed in the wrong, but if Yun Mengsi lost, their six-direction spiritual region would have lost 3 matches in a row. Even if they won the last match, it would be hard to explain when they returned. However, at this moment, Leng Shiqi, who was supporting Delta Origi, said something that shocked everyone. Delta Origi lost this match. What? Yu Shu exclaimed. Xiongming also looked at Leng Shiqi in surprise. Even the disciples of the six-direction spiritual region had expressions of disbelief. However, Leng Shiqi looked at Yun Mengsi with a hint of murderous intent in his eyes. Chapter 296. The reason why Leng Shiqi said this was because regardless of whether it was a draw or a win for Gu San, Yun Mengsi would still participate. Leng Shiqi didn't want her to step down. Delta Origi sensed Leng Shiqi's murderous intent and said, "I admit defeat." This, Yu Shu and the others looked at each other. Yun Mengsi was obviously cheating, but they couldn't say that Delta Origi would win. Therefore, it wasn't unacceptable for this battle to be considered a draw. However, Delta Origi admitted defeat, which confused Yu Shu and Hengmin. As for Hateful Blade and the others, they remained silent. Since Delta Origi admitted defeat, they could only accept it silently. Formless crossed his arms and looked like he was waiting to watch a good show. Leng Shiqi whispered to Delta Origi, "Go and rest. Leave the rest to me." Delta Origi didn't force herself this time and nodded obediently. After Delta Origi left, Leng Shiqi's eyes turned colder and colder. He said, "I am Leng Shiqi. Please enlighten me." Yun Mengsi also thought that it would be best for her and Delta Origi to end up in a draw. She wasn't confident that she could defeat Delta Origi, but she also didn't think that she would lose. Therefore, when Delta Origi admitted defeat, she couldn't help but be stunned. What surprised her more was that Leng Shiqi made this decision for Delta Origi. Delta Origi actually did this. What was their purpose in doing this? Yun Mengsi couldn't figure it out. However, when she saw Leng Shiqi's ice-cold gaze, she felt a chill in her heart that went straight to her soul. She vaguely understood what was going on. Leng Shiqi didn't hesitate at all. He raised his right arm and 36 demonic patterns appeared. After the spiritual pulse realm, one could condense 9 demonic patterns every time they broke through a realm. The 36 demonic patterns made Leng Shiqi feel like his arm was filled with explosive power. He stretched out his 5 fingers and his palm turned into a pitch-black demonic claw. In an instant, demonic aura rose around him and a demonic claw half the height of a human formed. Earth Fiend Demonic Claw. Yun Mengsi didn't dare to be distracted. She quickly formed a hand seal, and as her spirit energy flashed, flames and golden light flashed. The demonic claw tore the flames and shattered the golden light, but it also dissipated into nothingness. Leng Shiqi was also a spirit caster, so he naturally knew the weakness of spirit casters, which was that there was a short buffer period between spirit techniques. The reason he used the Earth Fiend Demon Shadow Claw was not to injure Yun Mengsi in the first place. Instead, it was to take advantage of this momentary gap. Before the claw shadow completely dissipated, Leng Shiqi punched out. The shadow of a ferocious tiger suddenly jumped out and pounced forward. Yun Mengsi didn't expect Leng Shiqi to attack so quickly. She didn't have time to form a hand seal. Mental energy surged between her eyebrows, and a green formation suddenly appeared in front of her. Layers upon layers of green light intertwined, like the roots of a towering tree overlapping with each other. The green light blocked the shadow of the tiger, but the internal energy within it went through the green light and attacked Yun Mengsi. Yun Mengsi immediately felt a huge force coming at her, but her clothes flashed with spirit light to dissolve the internal energy. She only took a few steps back. What shocked her was that Leng Shiqi had appeared beside her without her noticing. Leng Shiqi used his palm as a knife. In an instant, hundreds of knife auras shot out, killing everything in their path. Yun Mengsi still didn't have time to form a hand seal. She spat out another word. Boom! Something strange happened. The air seemed to vibrate rhythmically, shattering the knife auras one after another. Leng Shiqi's 3 consecutive attacks didn't yield any obvious results. The other 3 disciples of the Liuhe spiritual zone smiled. Only Elder Shao frowned more and more. In fact, Leng Shiqi was also a little surprised. Yun Mingxi was proficient in the Spirit Seal style, the Spirit Incantation style, and the Spirit Formation style. She was indeed a rare genius. But she had to pay the price today. Yun Mingxi had just shattered the knife auras when another 5 bloodlines shot out. Each bloodline was condensed to the extreme and aimed at her fatal spots. This was also the Blood Heavenly Finger, but it was performed by a Spirit Pulse Level 3 cultivator. It was the Blood Heavenly Finger of the Perfection stage. Ah! Yun Mingxi suddenly screamed in the face of danger. Violent mental energy surged out. At this moment, she had no choice but to overdraw her mental energy. She didn't form a hand seal this time. Instead, the shadow of the palace appeared in the air again. But what she didn't know was that Leng Shiqi had been waiting for this moment. Leng Shiqi's eyes flickered with a strange light. One of his eyes was enough to shake people's hearts and souls. The other eye looked lifeless, but it contained the terror of life and death. He performed the soul-scaring technique and the mind-stealing technique at the same time. Originally, this Level 3 illusory technique was almost useless against a Spirit Pulse Realm cultivator like Yun Mingxi. But Yun Mingxi had already exhausted a lot of her mental energy in the fierce battle with the Delta Origi. Now, Leng Shiqi was forcing her to overdraw her mental energy. This way, although she could explode with powerful mental energy for a short period of time, she wouldn't be able to resist the illusory technique. The shadow of the palace above Yun Mingxi's head had just taken shape, but it suddenly disappeared. Even Yun Mingxi herself stood there in a daze, motionless. Leng Shiqi formed a sword with his fingers. Dozens of invisible channel unblocking sword auras shot out and pierced into Yun Mingxi's body mercilessly. Not only did the channel unblocking sword auras leave wounds all over her body, but they also caused blood vessels to appear all over her body. More than half of the meridians in her body were sealed. This time, she was really in a situation where she was bound to lose. Seeing this scene, Elder Shao sighed inwardly. However, it was already very good that Yun Mingxi could hold on until now. On the other hand, the other 3 people had yet to recover from Yun Mingxi's sudden defeat. Just a moment ago, the 2 of them were still fighting back and forth. Seeing that Yun Mingxi was about to explode, she suddenly froze. They had all subconsciously thought that Leng Shiqi was a martial artist, so they had overlooked the possibility of an illusory technique. However, to everyone's surprise, Leng Shiqi did not stop there. His eyes suddenly shone with a terrifying murderous intent. He struck out 6 palms and the 6 palms combined into one. Instantly, a huge palm of demonic flames came crashing down. There was only one ending for a defenseless martial artist when faced with such a palm, and that was death. Elder Shao was immediately enraged. How dare you? Just as he was about to intervene, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. It was Hateful Blade. Elder Shao, the battle is not over yet. If you intervene, it will be equivalent to admitting defeat. Hateful Blade's sudden appearance shocked Elder Shao. He said in a low voice, I admit defeat on behalf of Yun Mingxi. Bang! However, Leng Shiqi's 6 solar poisonous fire palms still struck Yun Mingxi's body. The boundless power of the palm and the sinister demonic flames engulfed her. Fortunately, she finally regained some consciousness at the last moment. Spiritual light flashed on her clothes continuously and blocked a portion of the power of the palm. Even so, she was still sent flying. Furthermore, the poisonous fire attacked her heart and she immediately spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. The scorching flames burned her clothes and seared her hair. She was in a pitiful state. After falling to the ground, she immediately fainted. At this moment, Leng Shiqi suddenly slapped his head regretfully and said, Oh no, Elder Shao was a little slow. I did not stop in time. Chapter 297. Elder Xiao's face was completely gloomy. He shouted in a low voice, "Is the Blood Garment Pavilion trying to ruin the bet this time?" The threat in his words was obvious. If Hen Dao hadn't stopped him just now, he could have saved Yun Mengsi at any time. It was obvious that Hen Dao's actions were intentional. However, Hen Dao said, "The disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion have always followed the rules in the competition." Yun Mengsi didn't admit defeat, so Leng Shiqi continued to attack. "No matter how you look at it, we are in the right." Elder Xiao shook his head secretly. This was back to the matter of Yun Mengsi being forced to use her protective trump card. The Six Directions spiritual region was indeed in the wrong, and because of this, the Delta Origi was seriously injured. However, he was the one who brought Yun Mengsi here. Now that she was in such a state, it would be difficult for him to report back. At this time, Wu Xiang cursed at Leng Shiqi, "You little bastard, how dare you be so heavy-handed to a disciple of the Six Directions spiritual region? She's a girl, why don't you know how to be gentle with her?" His voice was very loud, but there was no hint of blame in his tone. Leng Shiqi also said very cooperatively, "Elder Xiao, fellow disciples of the Six Directions spiritual region, I'm not good enough and didn't stop for a moment. Please forgive me." Elder Xiao knew that the Blood Garment Pavilion was giving him a way out. He also knew that the Six Directions spiritual region and the Blood Garment Pavilion joining forces was the region master's idea. As an elder, he actually didn't have much authority. In the end, he could only use silence to cover this matter. He didn't pay any attention to Leng Shiqi. Instead, he helped Yun Mengsi up and fed her a pill. Miraculously, Yun Mengsi woke up in an instant, and the fire poison in her body was also cleansed. After Yun Mengsi woke up, the first thing she looked at was Leng Shiqi, and the expression in her eyes was unusually complicated. Leng Shiqi didn't look at Yun Mengsi. Instead, he looked at the last youth. He was the person from the Six Directions spiritual region who hadn't made a move yet. As long as they defeated him, the Blood Garment Pavilion would win. This youth had a strong physique and a resolute face. His body was full of vitality, and it was obvious that he had also cultivated a body-refining technique. He walked over with a crimson spear in hand, his battle intent surging. Leng Shiqi's expression froze. He could feel that this was a formidable opponent. Six Directions spiritual region, Gongye Mingshu. As Gongye Mingshu stood there, his entire body seemed to have fused with the long spear. He didn't make any movements, but he gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. As Leng Shiqi had exposed many of his moves during the fight with Yun Mengsi just now, he decided to observe the situation and test Gongye Mingshu's actual strength first. Gongye Mingshu didn't hold back as well. He shook the spear in his hand, and there were actually traces of lightning flowing on it. After that, the lightning spear suddenly whipped over like a whip. Although this spear technique was a spear technique, there seemed to be a hint of a staff technique within it. It was extremely ferocious. Leng Shiqi took a deep breath. Using the spirit steps, he flew backward quickly, and at the same time, he unleashed a few frost sword energies to neutralize the wind generated by the spear. Bang! Gongye Mingshu stomped on the ground with one foot, and his body shot out like a sharp arrow that had left the bow. He thrust his spear forward, and the body of the spear blossomed with a crimson light. It smashed down from the sky like a red sun, and its imposing manner was extremely shocking. Leng Shiqi didn't dodge this time. The astral wood spirit spear appeared in his hand as well. Then, his eyes widened slightly, and his entire body emitted an imposing manner of charging into enemy lines alone. Charging into enemy lines would only lead to death. He thrust his spear forward like Gongye Mingshu, but the difference was that the tip of his spear drew out a huge cross of spirit light. The crimson sun was cut apart by the cross of spirit light, and the tips of the two spears collided with each other accurately. Instantly, an ear-piercing sound of collision was heard. Then an invisible force spread out from the tip of the spear, and it stirred up gusts of wind. Leng Shiqi immediately felt an enormous force pass from the body of the spear to his arm, and it shook him to the point that the web between his thumb and forefinger cracked, and his arm went numb. The strength of Gong Yemingshu's body was actually stronger than his. On the other hand, Gong Yemingshu retreated 2 steps, and he was even more shocked in his heart. After this attack, he could feel that his body was stronger than Leng Shiqi's, and his spirit spear was better than Leng Shiqi's. His spirit techniques weren't inferior to Leng Shiqi's either. However, while he retreated 2 steps, Leng Shiqi didn't retreat. He was actually at a disadvantage in this attack. He found it hard to understand. He also somewhat understood the difficulties of Xiao Fu and Wan Rui. However, Elder Xiao saw through the reason behind this. It was because Leng Shiqi's spear thrust was filled with the will to die, and Gong Yemingshu had always treated this as a competition. Unknowingly, his imposing manner had already fallen to a disadvantage. Not only him, but the 3 people from before were also the same. However, Elder Xiao didn't have any intention of blaming them. He also knew that this had always been the drawback of the Liuhe spiritual region's disciples. In fact, their disciples didn't lack battle experience, and they would often spar and compete with each other. However, the Blood Clothing Pavilion's disciples had all climbed out of a sea of blood and piles of corpses. Facing such an opponent, Gong Yemingshu and the others' biggest weakness was that they didn't have the experience of fighting with their lives on the line. When Wu Xiang saw Leng Shiqi's spear, he muttered with satisfaction, "He's improved a little." After his attack failed, Gong Yemingshu let out a low roar and began a frenzied attack. Every thrust of his spear was wide open, and the spear was filled with flames and traces of lightning. Its power was astonishing. In the blink of an eye, Leng Shiqi was forced to retreat again and again. Under the sky full of spear shadows, Leng Shiqi was like a small boat in a huge wave, and could capsize at any time. Leng Shiqi naturally couldn't continue like this. Then he unsheathed his inky jade sword, and his sword swept out like a river. Streaks of dark green sword light and spear shadows constantly clashed, and countless sparks were created. It was even more dazzling. All of a sudden, Leng Shiqi's sword style changed. It became soft and gentle like a gentle breeze brushing the willows. The 2 completely opposite sword styles were instantly switched in his hands, causing Gong Yemingshu, who had already adapted to Leng Shiqi's attack rhythm, to have an unusual feeling of suffocation. However, his reaction wasn't slow either. His spear style also changed, and became like a long whip. However, Leng Shiqi's sword style changed again. Sometimes it was fierce, sometimes it was light, sometimes it was as fast as a rainbow, and sometimes it was as slow as a willow catkin. This was the great perfection of the 17 sword styles of Mount Song, and it was vividly displayed by Leng Shiqi with his 5th-level spirit sword. The constantly changing sword style made Gong Yemingshu a little overwhelmed. Although he was also good at different spear styles, he certainly couldn't be as free and flexible as Leng Shiqi when switching between styles. Gradually, Leng Shiqi suppressed Gong Yemingshu. Gong Yemingshu knew that he couldn't continue like this. He swatted away Leng Shiqi's inky jade sword with his spear. Then, his expression turned serious, and he formed a mystical spirit seal with one hand. What was even stranger was that the spirit seal was actually imprinted on his own body. Immediately, blazing flames and tyrannical lightning surged around Gong Yemingshu's body. He stood there safe and sound, like a Balrog or thunder god. Chapter 298. Gong Yemingshu suddenly erupted with such a powerful aura, causing everyone to be slightly shocked. Xiao Fu said coldly, that Leng Shiqi can force senior brother Gongye to use the Crimson Thunder insight. He's quite capable, but that's it. Wan Rui added, that's right. Senior brother Gongye's cultivation is comparable to the middle stage of the spiritual pulse realm. Leng Shiqi will definitely lose. Only Yun Mengsi didn't speak. She knew that Leng Shiqi could use illusions to temporarily control her, a spirit caster. It was obvious that Leng Shiqi's mental strength was extremely powerful. Moreover, he was also good at illusions. She had to be careful. Unfortunately, before Gong Yemingshu stepped forward, she hadn't completely woken up and forgot to remind him. If she said it now, it would be considered cheating again. Lung Shiqi's mind moved, and his body was instantly covered in a set of ferocious armor that looked like a giant demon. His aura suddenly soared to the middle stage of the spiritual pulse realm. He swung the black jade sword horizontally, and 36 demonic patterns appeared. A sword ray that combined the intent of sharpness and heaviness flashed past in an instant. Other than Wu Xiang and Delta Origi, everyone else showed varying degrees of surprise. Xiao Fu and Wan Rui both widened their eyes. Lung Shiqi's current state was even stronger than Gong Yemingshu's. They had just said that this wave was in the bag, and in the blink of an eye, such an unforeseen event had occurred. While they were shocked, they also felt ashamed to the point of being unable to show their faces. Yun Mengxi's eyes were not only filled with surprise, but also a bit of fear. If Lung Shiqi used this move during the battle with her, she would have lost long ago. Even a few Sky Origin Realm experts stared at Lung Shiqi's demonic beast blood rune armor, as if they wanted to figure it out. Old Blockhead transmitted his voice to Old Bones. "Can you see anything mysterious about it?" "Wonderful. It contains blood chi, demonic chi, and demonic chi." How did he fuse these three completely different types of power together? There's the aura of the Bloody Slaughter 7 Fiend art here. Did this kid change the Bloody Slaughter 7 Fiend art? Very likely. This child is truly a genius. Our decision to let him live was correct. Meng Ming clenched his fists tightly. No one knew what he was thinking. As for Yushu, his mouth was wide open and his saliva was almost flowing out. He said, "So handsome." At this moment, a hint of worry appeared in Elder Xiao's eyes for the first time. On the other hand, Gong Yemingshu was the calmest of them all, because all of his thoughts were focused on how to defeat Lung Shiqi. Gong Yemingshu's figure moved. Intense flames and tyrannical thunderbolts soared into the sky before abruptly smashing down. Lung Shiqi swung his black jade sword, and more than 200 blue frosty sword chis surged in the sky, destroying the soaring flames and lightning. At the same time, a penetrating cold air and an incomparably hot wave of fire gushed out from his body at the same time. Ice and fire were two substances that naturally countered each other. But at this moment, in Lung Shiqi's hands, they actually fused together perfectly. The cold air and the flames intertwined together like a small tornado whistling out. In the 10 days before the battle, Lung Shiqi did not waste his time. His greatest gain was that under Wu Xiang's guidance, he was able to fuse Spirit Assault, Path of Ice and Spirit Assault, Bombardment of Flames together. It became a fire and ice tornado that was comparable to a 5th-level spiritual skill. Seeing this scene, Wu Xiang smiled proudly. When some people smiled, of course, there were also people who wanted to cry, such as Gong Yemingshu. How could he have expected that Lung Shiqi was such a powerful spiritual caster? Although the sudden loss of the Dream Cloud Silk had made him suspicious, he had never thought in this direction. But Gong Yemingshu was also stimulated with a trace of ruthlessness. His body suddenly arched strangely, but it looked strangely beautiful, as if all the muscles and strength in his body had been adjusted to a perfect state. Then, the flames and lightning around his body twisted and turned, gradually forming the shape of a dragon. And the spear was the dragon's head. Gong Yemingshu's body suddenly pounced, turning into a large dragon and red lightning, and directly collided with the fire and ice tornado. With a loud boom, huge airwaves exploded with flames, cold air, and thunderbolts. The area within a radius of dozens of meters was turned into a mess. The experts of the Blood Clothing Pavilion and Lioha Spiritual Region all retreated with their disciples. The flames dissipated, and a broken dragon appeared. The dragon spat out a spear tip that shone with dense spiritual light, and it instantly pierced through Lung Shiqi's figure. We won. Oh no. The disciples of both sides had completely opposite thoughts. However, Gong Yemingshu was stunned because he did not feel his body being pierced. In other words, the Lung Shiqi in front of him was a fake. Sure enough, Lung Shiqi's body suddenly burst like a bubble, and turned into gorgeous petals that gently fluttered. Gong Yemingshu looked up vigilantly. Unknowingly, countless petals were sprinkling down from the sky around him. It was like a rain of petals, beautiful and magnificent. At this moment, Gong Yemingshu was about to be intoxicated by this beautiful world of flowers, but he suddenly bit his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was shocked and said in his heart, "I was almost pulled into an illusion." Then, the countless petals rapidly spun, and then shot towards Gong Yemingshu. Each petal was actually a sword chi. However, there were real and fake sword chi, and it was impossible to guard against. Gong Yemingshu held his spear horizontally above his head, and all the spiritual energy in his body converged on the spear. Suddenly, flames rose, and lightning flashed. He wanted to use force to break the technique. However, when his attention was completely focused on the sky, dozens of Leng Shichi suddenly appeared, and dozens of violent sword chi engulfed Gong Yemingshu. Gong Yemingshu turned pale with fright. Facing the sword chi that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, he felt a trace of the threat of death for the first time. This made him want to use his life-saving trump card, but if he did that, he would be able to resolve the current crisis, but he would also lose. At this moment, a huge palm blotted out the sky and instantly destroyed all the sword chi, and the sky was completely swept clean. It was Elder Shao. This time, Hateful Blade did not stop him. Because if Elder Shao made a move, it meant that Gong Yemingshu had lost. At the same time, it also meant that the Sixth Direction spiritual region had lost. Gong Yemingshu's face was gloomy. As one of the most outstanding disciples of the Sixth Direction spiritual region, he naturally had some pride in his heart. However, he had lost just like that, and he had lost in such a straightforward manner. What made him feel strange was that all the sword chi, as well as the illusions, had disappeared. Where had the Leng Shichi gone? At this moment, a voice came from beneath Gong Yemingshu's feet. "Let's consider this my win." Chapter 299. 3 days later, Leng Shichi finished refining the 9-melody spirit fusion pill given to him by the Pavilion Master. His cultivation had soared to the 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm. As long as his cultivation was high, the power of his spiritual skills would naturally increase. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Master Wu Xiang wants to see you." "Got it." Leng Shichi then stretched his muscles and bones. After cultivating for 3 days, his body was slightly stiff. After a short while, Leng Shichi came to Wu Xiang's place. When Wu Xiang saw Leng Shichi's 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm, he did not say anything. It was as if everything was within his expectations. Wu Xiang waved his hand and sprinkled a green light that enveloped the entire hall. Leng Shichi felt that this should be some kind of isolation restriction. However, he was a little surprised that Wu Xiang Palace had to use such a method in the Blood Garment Pavilion. Then, what Wu Xiang was going to say next must be of great importance. Wu Xiang also put away his unreliable appearance and said solemnly, "Leng Shichi, what I'm going to say next is of great importance. Besides you and me, only the Pavilion Master knows about this. In this world, I don't want a 4th person to know about this." Leng Shichi's heart trembled. What was it that even the 2 Pavilion Masters, the Deputy Pavilion Master and the Disciplinary Elder, could not know about it? He said solemnly, "I'll keep that in mind. 3 days ago, you defeated the 6th Direction spiritual region in a battle. At the same time, the Blood Garment Pavilion also received the support of the 6th Direction spiritual region. Then, the next step of the plan can be carried out. That is the Blood Seed Plan after the Blood Fog Island Plan." Blood Seed Plan? Leng Shichi was confused, but he did not ask any questions. Wu Xiang continued, "The Blood Seed Plan was originally expected to start in a few years. However, you and Delta Origi have broken through to the spiritual pulse realm one after another and have the ability to protect yourself, so the Blood Seed Plan started in advance. This plan is also an extremely important part of changing the future of the Blood Garment Pavilion. You are the first seed. Do you still remember that I once said that the Blood Garment Pavilion didn't nurture the 4 of you to be assassins? If it was just this, it would never be able to change the situation of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Take a look at this." At this point, Wu Xiang suddenly took out a huge box from his mustard seed bag. That box was more than half a zhang long and half a zhang tall. What is this? Leng Shiqi asked curiously. Wu Xiang said, "You can open it and take a look." Leng Shiqi opened the box. There was a faint musty smell, as if the things inside had been there for a long time. When he opened it, all he saw was a bunch of messy things. This included rattles, strange black rods, children's tattered clothes. There were even a few spiritual artifacts and techniques. It could be said that everything was there. However, these things were all very old. On one side of the box, there were several stacks of thick books. Some were old, some were new, and the newest one seemed to have been bound not long ago. Seeing these things, Leng Shiqi was even more confused. What are these? At this moment, Wu Xiang's voice sounded, "These are all your things." Leng Shiqi said in surprise, "What? My things?" His mind raced. He suddenly remembered that he had no memory of this body before he was 10 years old. Could these things be related to the original owner of this body? Wu Xiang's tone changed again. To be precise, these are the things of the other you. They are also the traces of the other you being alive. The other me? Leng Shiqi seemed to have vaguely grasped something. He seemed to have experienced this scene before. He remembered. Before he entered the illusory spirit's secret realm, Feng Shamo had found him and said that he would arrange a new identity for him, which was the identity of Zhuqiu. At that time, Feng Shamo had given him some things to hide his identity, including Zhuqiu's life records. He could not help but think to himself, is Wu Xiang or the Blood Garment Pavilion also arranging a new identity for me? From today onwards, you are not only the Blood Garment Assassin of the Blood Garment Pavilion, Leng Shiqi. You are no longer just an assassin. You will appear in the world with another identity. We call it birth. Wu Xiang's words confirmed Leng Shiqi's thoughts. He thought to himself that it was indeed so. The sect has already prepared a perfect identity for you. No matter who comes to investigate you, they will not reveal any flaws. Now you have a choice. After you birth, it is best to join two forces. It can also be said that you are two completely different branches of the same force. That is, the Discipline Commission and the Dark Thunder Guards. Discipline Commission, Dark Thunder Guards. Leng Shiqi was shocked. Of course, he knew these two names. He had even killed Chu Xinran, who was a Dark Thunder Guard. Regardless of whether it was the Discipline Commission or the Dark Thunder Guards, they were directly under the jurisdiction of the Thunderblaze dynasty's royal family. However, they were mainly responsible for different things. The Discipline Commission was like the Thunderblaze dynasty's claws and teeth. It was responsible for handling the conflicts between the dynasty's forces and the spirit cultivator sections. Discipline meant that if they could suppress it, then they would suppress it. If they could not suppress it, then they would appease it. However, the authority of the discipline department differed greatly from province to province. For example, in the Muqin County and Donglin County, where there were top forces, the Discipline Commission existed in name only. This was because they did not have the ability to suppress the Blood Robe Pavilion or the Mountain Sea sect. However, in other counties, they might have monstrous authority and power. As for the people of the Discipline Commission, they had never been liked by the people of the leading sections. Even rogue cultivators looked down on them. Their reputation was extremely bad. As for the Dark Thunder Guards, they were the hidden fangs of the Thunderblaze dynasty. The fundamental purpose of the Dark Thunder Guards was to eliminate all people, things, and things that affected the stability of the dynasty. From supervising the royal family, civil and military officials, to eliminating spirit cultivators who caused trouble, they were all under their jurisdiction. For example, Buyuanho was secretly investigated by the Dark Thunder Guards and found evidence of him secretly manufacturing weapons, leading to the execution of Buyuanho's entire family. For example, the black-veiled woman that Leng Shiqi met in the illusory spirit's secret realm was to investigate the 5 devil cultivators who caused trouble. No matter where the Dark Thunder Guards were, they had a lot of power. Even the lowest level Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion. That meant that they could ignore the laws of the Thunderblaze dynasty and directly act first and report later. Therefore, the Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the people of the dynasty. And now, Wu Xiang actually asked Leng Shiqi to choose one of them. Leng Shiqi had already vaguely guessed what the Blood Robe Pavilion wanted to do. They were clearly asking him to be a spy. However, the Discipline Commission had become enemies with the spirit cultivators of the world. The Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the various forces of the dynasty. Neither of these were good places to go. If he had to choose between the two, Leng Shiqi hesitated for a moment, but he was still more willing to choose the Dark Thunder Guards. Perhaps it was because he was used to walking in the dark that he would be more proficient in doing things in the dark. Moreover, the Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion, which also gave him some initiative. Thus, he said, "Disciple is willing to go to the Dark Thunder Guards." Wu Xiang nodded and said, "Yes, I will arrange this matter for you as soon as possible. Take these things back and take a good look. Be sure to memorize every word and sentence." Disciple understands. Leng Shiqi cupped his hands and said. Then, he casually opened a page of the book, but there was a name that he would never have dreamed of, Lu Xingji. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.